All right, if you're ready, I'm ready.
You're unmuted.
All right, it's 5 o'clock, everyone, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Cronin, City Engineer in the MSO Department. This is the December 7th Multi-modal Transportation Commission meeting, and this is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, I may mute or unmute people as needed. Each time you speak, please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening remotely. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking the video icon. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on during the meeting. If you are participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, somewhere on your screen, you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. And now we'll start by having Allie call the roll.
All right. Allie Weems, MSO. Catherine Schartz. Lauren Freeman. Here. Thomas Allen. Charlie Bryan. Donna Holteen. Steve Evans.
Here.
Carol Bowen. Nick Kuzmyak.
Here.
And Aaron Payton. All right, that is 4 people.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and turn it over to the chair, Nick.
All right. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I guess there's not really too much for me to say, except for that I'm going to be launching into, is Dustin there? For our study session item, which is to consider providing feedback on drafting a pedestrian crossing improvements policy.
Thanks, Nick. This is Dustin Smith, Senior Project Engineer with MSO. And he said we're going to talk about crossing improvement policies. So staff had recognized that it would be important to have a policy in place to provide a way of systematically evaluating pedestrian crossings and determining if improvements were appropriate and then what improvements should be applied to a particular crossing location. And having the policy would provide consistent results citywide to provide safe crossings and also align with the MPO pedestrian plan's ultimate goal of having complete citywide system of quality pedestrian infrastructure paired with policies and programs that encourage more people to walk. So give kind of an overview of how the policy would be applied. So you start with the evaluation process, and that's kind of an inventory of the location of the crossing. And you'd collect the physical data of the crossing, things like the roadway geometry, the posted speed limit, the crossing distance, stopping sight distance, if it's controlled or uncontrolled crossing location, and if there's another crossing nearby that could be utilized. The second part of the data collection would be the traffic data, so your vehicle volume data and pedestrian volume data at the location. So then, when you have the data, there's several different references that I've reviewed, and typically they use thresholds of the vehicle data and pedestrian vehicle volume and pedestrian volume, and then the physical roadway characteristics as well, and that guides you to different crossing treatments through either like a flow chart type evaluation or a table, a kind of selection table based on the criteria you're looking at. I guess quickly mention that the thresholds are consistent pretty much everywhere that I looked, coming generally from FHWA studies and have filtered down through the cities and states that I reviewed their crossing policies. So once you've kind of gone through the flow chart or the selection table, that leads you to levels of treatment, if you will, which you can have a selection that says to leave the crossing unmarked, but then increasing levels of treatment would be marking the crossing with pavement marking and signs, onto more active methods like a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, a hawk, or an actual pedestrian signal. I think that's kind of the overview of the process I wanted to hit. I think I'll open it up for questions, discussion.
All right. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Does anybody on the commission have any opening questions for Dustin on sort of the process and background information of what's been looked into so far?
Well, I'll start, Nick. This is Steve Evans, Commissioner. Dustin, I looked through the attachments, not in great detail, but there's quite a bit of information there in terms of the flow charts and criteria. It kind of looks like it could be overwhelming, but it's probably simpler than it looks. I think it would be good. I don't know if you could do this on the spot, but maybe you and Dave or you two together could give us an example. Maybe pick a location that we would all be familiar with that wouldn't be terribly complicated, and just show us how this works. It's kind of hard for me to have looked at all of that information and just say, okay, this is what I think is good and this is what I think could work better. But I'm always one to try to promote examples of the tools that we have. And so I'll just do that again in this case.
Thank you, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Steve, I would completely agree with you on that one. And I'm hoping to get a little bit more background information from you, Dustin, because to be honest, I have not had the time to go in great detail, but like Steve was saying, there are these various matrices and flowcharts. It looks like a lot of people have done a lot of great work already, so it would be nice if we could just adapt one of these to Lawrence rather than reinventing the wheel. I guess just a couple of questions to clear up first. So it looks like to me that there are three general, I guess, resources or templates that you've presented here, and that would be Boulder, Colorado, North Carolina Department of Transportation, and the Federal Highway Administration. Is that right? Those three, I guess, templates?
Dustin Smith with MSO, that's correct, yeah.
Okay. There aren't any like overlaps or anything. These really are three kind of independent sources.
Dustin Smith with MSO, actually they're all coming from kind of the same source study from FHWA. And then I did note with the Boulder one, they've kind of expanded on it, but they ended up with at the same thresholds and noted that they had verified those thresholds with their traffic engineers in Boulder.
Okay. Thank you, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. So it sounds like that they all take it from the same centralized federal set of guidance. I'm assuming it's not binding from FHWA. It's just kind of stuff they've thought could apply to various cities. And it sounds like Boulder has taken that and sort of run with it with a more tailored approach to their own city. Did I understand that correctly?
Dustin Smith with MSO, that's correct. And again, Boulder has kind of done their own research to sort of verify that original FHWA study. And then I think the last 2 pages of the Boulder attachments were the kind of colorful charts for selecting between RRFB, Hawk, or pedestrian signal. And those are, as far as I could tell, unique to Boulder. That was based purely on their research. And so they went a little bit further with, because I think they were kind of an early adopter of the RRFBs, and they started studying them kind of as soon as they started installing them. And so they were able to expand on that part of it, if you will.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for the explanation. I had another question about the background information. So though it looks like the main source of guidance is the FHWA, do you know if there's any similar guidance from NACTO? It seems like they generally tend to focus on more pedestrian and other multimodal, I guess, concerns rather than FHWA, which is, I mean, technically the highway administration, though they do govern a lot of forms of transportation. So I'm just kind of curious if there's either complementary or maybe competing guidance from other organizations such as NACTO.
Dustin Smith with MSO. I guess I would start off saying, again, that the FHWA seemed to be kind of the industry standard, but I may ask Dave if he's familiar with NACTO specifically.
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. I'm familiar with NACTO, but I don't think that they have published guidance on treatments, at least not that I'm aware of. So I think a lot of their guidelines are more conceptual, and I don't know if it gets down into the engineering, more of the engineering side, but we'd have to look into that further if they've adopted any of these criteria.
Yeah, that's kind of what it looks like from a cursory glance of their website, is that there are a lot of conceptual, I guess, ideas and guidance, but I'm not sure if there's actually a design, actual design guideline for how to do a pedestrian crossing at an intersection. So I'd have to look more into it, but it looks like you really need access to their urban street design guides. I don't know if the city of Lawrence has access to that, but knowing what little I do know about NACTO and how they kind of try to promote multimodality as a way of life, it seems like it might not be a bad idea to look into them and see if there's any really conflicting guidelines or if they're pretty much in line with FHWA.
Dustin Smith with MSO, and I apologize. I very well could have looked into it, but there was just so much that I did look at that it all kind of runs together after a while. So I tried to pull out
that. No worries.
what I kind of determined to be standard practice and best practices that I found.
This is Steve again, Transportation Commissioner. Dustin, have you guys walked through any of these tools with examples in Lawrence and kind of given them a test run?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I'll jump in. Steve, we've kind of used some of this before to look at crossing treatments. 7th and Tennessee is one. We're doing a rectangular rapid flashing beacon versus 21st and Mass, which is we're doing a hawk signal. And I guess the difference is you're crossing 2 lanes of traffic on Tennessee versus Mass Street, where you're crossing 4 lanes of traffic and probably a little more volume on Mass Street. So those are kind of the two similar instances where you have uncontrolled crossings. There's not a signal or stop signs there today, and so just making a decision on what treatment to use, what improvements to make. That that's kind of what we're trying to standardize with this. And so those are two recent examples that are, the 21st and Mass is under construction here. Right now, the signals aren't up yet, but I think that we looked at, and the consultant with that project also looked at this criteria as a guide to make that recommendation or decision. And we're looking to kind of have to adopt that as well as our policy, whether it's a CIP city project or even a development project. If we're putting in a crossing, a mid-block crossing, what would we require the improvements to include? And it may just be a marked crosswalk, and it may necessitate the need for an RFB or a Hawk signal. So just depending on the situation, that's kind of what we're looking at doing here and getting that into our design criteria. So
this is Steve again. So Dave and Dustin, are you guys looking at a Lawrence, Kansas version of all these that is more customized for our town? Or are you just saying you can utilize what's already out there when you have a project?
This is Dustin Smith with MSO. I guess I would envision it's more the selection criteria, the table, the matrix, the flow chart. That's already kind of standardized, so I wouldn't, like we said earlier, reinvent the wheel on that, but we would, kind of backfill the policy behind, how we use those and when we use these charts and tables to evaluate crossings.
yeah, and I would also add, Dave Cronin, city engineer, that we are, in the big picture, we also need to understand the priority and the cost for these improvements, of where we mark crosswalks, what the overall implication is on cost and life cycle costs of the improvements for us to build and maintain. So I think we need to do a little more work, after we kind of get some guidelines set out to see what the estimated costs are. And I think we're planning to do a lot more work on identifying what the uncontrolled crossings, where should we prioritize those with our non-motorized money that we have every year. And then after prioritizing the location, then kind of drill down to what the appropriate design is.
Well, I could see, and this is Steve again, I could see a couple of things. I mean, there's probably categories of projects that, for instance, a crosswalk that is on the loop or on a bike path, or, some element in the town that would be repetitious. And then there would be kind of other arbitrary, unique, maybe like 7th and Tennessee, 21st and Mass, although they have similar locations in town. I think, what am I trying to say here? I think I'm trying to say that it would streamline our process and our thinking if we could understand, could be involved and participate in the early analysis in using these tools, as opposed to, okay, here's the tool we used and this is what it told us. Again, I'm always kind of big on process for us, and I think that kind of helps us get to the finish line a little quicker sometimes too.
If I can interject for a minute, this is Jessica Martinger, Transportation Planning Manager for the MPO. And I want to point out that in our Lawrence Bike Plan Design Guideline, we actually, in the adopted version that you recommended and the city adopted, on page A42, which is in the appendices for the design guide, we already have an adopted set of these pedestrian crossing treatments that we used in the bikeway design guide, Steve, kind of for that exact reason, which is we recognize that some of these pedestrian crossing elements also impact bikeway crossings. And so as you're talking about how the city would use it, I think also it fits into the context we're looking at as we talk about design in the larger planning context. And I would note we included an ALTA planning and design table that they had used on the Bike Boulevard project that they said was okay to use as long as we cited it. It's very similar to their involvement on the federal highways countermeasure selection work that they did for the pedestrian crossing guide stuff. So it's already consistent with some of the work and planning and conversations we've had about where it's appropriate for, and on that chart you'll see it's similar to the federal highway one where there's some things where it's uncalled for in terms of not recommended, some places it's desirable, and sometimes where there's engineering judgment. So I think, Steve, that's probably the hard part where if you want to get involved earlier in the process, very easily you can see what type of classification, speed, or type of lanes the street has. And that very quickly leaves you only oftentimes a few choices for it's either desirable or within the engineering judgment. And that's the part you want to kind of hear that discussion around probably.
Thanks, Jessica. That was helpful.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. So Dave and Dustin, in terms of evaluating some examples in Lawrence to kind of test drive these potential guidelines that we could either adopt and or work into the MPO plan. Dave, you mentioned 7th in Tennessee, I believe, and 21st in Mass. Those sound like they're fairly similar, but are being treated in different ways. Is that correct?
Dave Cronin's the engineer. Yeah, we're doing a rectangular rapid flashing beacon at 7th in Tennessee and a hawk signal at 21st in Mass.
Okay. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I wonder if it would be helpful to also analyze a very different kind of intersection to see if the recommendations from these various decision matrices kind of are in line with what either has been done or what is planned to be done. So, for example, Clinton Parkway in Castle, it seems like a potentially good one because it's currently under construction, and I'd be kind of curious to see on that one what would be recommended for based on these guidelines if it's close to what's actually going in. And a potential other candidate, I think, is Clinton Parkway and Lawrence Avenue, simply because of the fairly recent fatalities there. So I don't want to load you guys up with extra homework, so I'm trying to be very judicious in choosing what these examples could be. But I don't know. I'd be interested to hear thoughts from the rest of the commission and from staff as well.
Dave Cronin's the engineer. Yeah, I think at controlled crossings, at signalized intersections, roundabouts, we would automatically mark the crosswalks. Those are pretty standard that we do now. And then if there was if we had data on safety issues with compliance with the crosswalk, we could then look to see if there's any other physical geometric improvements that may be needed, whether it's whatever it is, whether it's a median or radius treatment. So that would be something that could be looked at with with a CIP project if we were redoing the street and an intersection. So but a lot of this really will help us out with those uncontrolled crossings, like the mid-block crossings, where we're trying to decide what treatment to do, whether it's just marking a crosswalk or to do something more substantial. And I'll also say we do have a crosswalk marking policy with our school area traffic control policy, where we mark one marked crosswalk for each street adjacent to the school. And so, I think that also, we've had questions before about marked crosswalks at four-way stops and whether or not we want to do that or not. So far, we just mark crosswalks at signals, roundabouts, the downtown area, and school area, school routes. And so I think, this also will help us at two or four-way stop-controlled intersections as well. But yeah, there's a lot to this, and there will be an engineering judgment that will be required in those situations where there's, I guess, compliance concerns at a crosswalk. So I guess I would add, we've had crosswalks where, we get a lot of complaints about people making turns and not yielding to pedestrians, where sometimes we will go out and put up a sign. We generally shy away from doing that because signs don't cure all the issues, but where there's where we definitely see there's an issue, that's the first thing we try to do is put up a very clear sign to motorists to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. So we've done that in a few instances. I think the Lawrence Loop crossing on Iowa Street's one, and 19th and Tennessee, I think we've done that as well, where we have a lot of right turns. So I just add that as well.
Okay, so it sounds like then, sorry, Kuzmyak, I'm TC chair. It sounds like then, at least from a staff perspective, you guys are more interested in trying to apply this to where there isn't any controlled crossing and maybe there should be, versus at already controlled crossings. Is that correct? Or is there an interest in seeing if we maybe need to recalibrate how we currently approach controlled crossings?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I think we want to look at everything, controlled crossings as well. It's always been our, we will continue to be marking crosswalks at signalized intersections. But like I said, if it's four-way stop intersection and, or other intersections, two-way stop, do we need to mark crosswalks or not? Those type of decisions and criteria to look at for those type of intersections too. So,
in terms of doing, I guess, example evaluations, I guess, is it reasonable to go through, I guess, assuming that the North Carolina DOT is really similar to FHWA, could we cut out FHWA and just go, do these example evaluations just with NCDOT and with Boulder, and just say, these are two real world applications of the federal guidance and call it that, and then choose a couple of intersections that represent a range of what could be found in Lawrence. I think maybe both 7th and Tennessee and 21st and Mass do sound like pretty good candidates because they are different. So be curious to see which way the guidelines kind of tilt, I guess, in terms of what they would recommend. But, do you feel that it would be reasonable to add maybe one or two other intersections? Or, just trying to get back to the question of, is that too much for staff to go through? Trying to be respectful of your time, but also make sure that we can properly evaluate this tool.
This is Dustin Smith with MSO. I think that's reasonable to look at a couple locations that everybody would be familiar with, and I think we probably have locations where we have the data already, as far as the vehicle data and the pedestrian data. I apologize, I wouldn't be able to find that on the fly here, but I think that's something I could prepare and bring back to walk through, the matrix as well as the flow chart at some point. Give you a better feel for how it actually works.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Nick Kuzmyak, I'm a TC chair. I'm thinking maximum 5 intersections, just because I think you could probably get a pretty good breadth with 5 at the very most. I'm thinking it might make sense to try to zero in on places where there are known pedestrian fatalities in the past, or bicyclist fatalities, because that may highlight places where we could see a deviation with what was done or planned versus what FHWA might recommend. So that's just my personal opinion. But other than Lawrence and 23rd, I'm not having any ringing a bell currently for particularly problematic intersections, but I'm sure other commissioners or staff could point the way to those.
This is Steve Evans again. Dave and Dustin, are there any projects on the horizon that in the next six to 12 months that are going to pop up that will actually be projects we look at on this commission that might fit into using this tool?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. Well, I'm sure there are. I'm trying to think of the projects on our 5-year plan. I think we had a crossing of 19th Street close to Alabama on there.
Right.
So that's one. Our Safe Routes to School projects, we have, I don't know about the next round, but on our previous project, we did a standalone project to install RRFBs on those routes, Safe Routes to School routes. And so there may be some opportunity with, if we get more Safe Routes to School money, which we just applied for some more, to look at crossing improvements, rapid flashing beacons on some of those routes. So maybe some opportunity there. I guess if any other staff can think of any other projects, feel free to chime in on ones that are coming up. I think
Well, that's this is Steve again. That would be an opportunity for us. So I'm all for looking at, like Nick said, places that may be problematic or, places that we all know about, but we'd get pretty good return if they were actual projects that are coming down the pike here.
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. I agree with that, Steve. And I'm thinking we get our Lawrence Loop project, where we'll have a crossing of North Iowa by Peterson Road. So that'll be one that we will review with this. And I think over at Michigan Street as well with that Lawrence Loop project, which is slated for next year. There'll be a couple crossings there at grade street crossings that this would be applicable to. So I think we could look at those. I think that's a good idea for the examples.
Jessica Mortinger, transportation planner. I can thinking about North Iowa and Peterson Road. Is that one of them Dave said? And then I was thinking we should look at maybe the Safe Routes to School routes and go back and look at there's crossings on collector streets that are more than, if they're uncontrolled or if they just have stop signs, in terms of looking at improvements there that could be added to a crossing project list for safe routes. And the other thing that's on the CIP that we've talked about before is Naismith. You have crossings obviously at 19th and at 23rd, and thinking about those intersecting streets and what sort of crossing improvements might need to be at those intersections that are just currently stop controlled.
Hey, Kuzmyak, I'm in TC chair. Well, I would personally vote for something that's on a major corridor, just because though it's good to focus on places where people already walk quite a bit. I think, as Carol's brought up a couple times, the issue is with intersections usually, and the huge intersections are usually the most problematic in town. So if we can find at least one that is on a big road, I think that would be instructive, not only to compare with what's been done already in terms of crossing treatments, but what could be done with the road itself. It's something that we don't really get involved in too much in terms of really large roads. It's been a while. Well, I guess up until the first agenda item of the regular meeting. But I think, I'm looking through the FHWA table of roadway features that, I guess, affect how you cross a street. And you got things like curb extension, pedestrian refuge island, road diet. And I think a lot of these are interesting ideas that I think are a lot more controversial on these large roads like Clinton or Castle or 6th that aren't particularly controversial on something like Louisiana Street, for example. So I would be curious to see if, and this is kind of, I guess, a devil's advocate thing, if there are any of these large intersections where going through the FHWA decision matrix, we end up finding some uncomfortable truths about, the road is way too big and encourages speeding that no amount of crosswalk is going to help people cross, safely. So I'd be particularly curious about those large intersections. And I think 2030 Castle represents kind of a good opportunity because it is under construction. So there has been a decision made there pretty recently. I think going too far back to stuff that's been improved a couple of years ago, guidance probably changes relatively frequently. So I think keeping improvements to like within the past 1 or 2 years could help us kind of compare apples to apples in terms of when the guidance could have applied.
Dustin Smith with MSO. I guess I would add, Nick, generally, you wouldn't have an uncontrolled crossing on those major streets, and so you're expecting people to cross at the signals, and we would have the marked crosswalks at the signals.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is that at some of these places where there are marked crosswalks, it still may not meet the FHWA guidelines because it may not have the proper curb bump outs or road diodes or pedestrian medians that they may require for a road with the given speed and volume that would bump it up into that particular threshold. And I guess in terms of unmarked crosswalks, I guess I might just be fuzzy on this definition, but it sounds to me like that just means a place in a road where people cross in noticeable numbers where there is not a crosswalk. And it may or may not necessarily be at an intersection, but I think 23rd Street and 6th Street actually have a lot of those because when you get into the very, to borrow a strong town's word, strode, when you get into the really strode parts, there are significant stretches with no crosswalks in between. I don't know how far they get, but I think some are spaced almost a quarter mile apart. So for those who are able-bodied and can try to make a run for it, you get a lot of people actually crossing the streets who probably shouldn't be, but there just aren't enough crosswalks to make it convenient for them to walk in that area. Maybe not speaking from experience here. So anyway, I don't know how you even determine those particular unmarked intersections because they're kind of more like desire paths. But since they're not in the grass, you can't see if they're a desire path or not. You just have to actually observe people crossing them or not. And I really don't know outside of anecdotal experience how you would figure out where those are. So I don't know. I think that's why for large roads, I would probably first focus on signalized intersections where there is an opportunity potentially for improvement versus trying to hunt down the elusive unmarked crossings along these roads. So I've probably talked enough here. I'd like to hear from some of the other members of the commission who have not spoken too much yet. So if anybody has any thoughts about kind of where at this point we seem to be taking this, or if you have any particular suggestions for where it might be good to evaluate an existing intersection, I certainly appreciate the input as well.
Commissioner Brian, I think it might help just to get a better sense of the intersections that staff imagines evaluating. And before we jump into what the right tool is, I'm not sure that it's our space to be deciding what the tool is. I'd like to just have maybe a step back and figure out, to your point that you just made, Nick, like there's intersections all over town. So what's the priority here? And are we trying to focus in on, intersections that we know are already dangerous or not? That was also discussed earlier. So now to me, that would be helpful. It just, at this point, the discussion feels like it's too technical and we need to get clear on what's the ask of us. If staff is asking us to pick a rubric or something, that's not, I don't think we're ready for that. But if it's about trying to identify what are the key intersections that seem to be a concern for people, that feels like something that's maybe more appropriate. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. As far as I understand, I think we're just kind of being presented with a whole bunch of potential rubrics that could be adapted to Lawrence, and just looking to see if it's worth pursuing any one of them individually, or it seems like a really general ask, if I have that correct, based on the agenda item. And I would say the tools you're referring to are these guidelines. So, I mean, for example, we could kind of evaluate an intersection in parallel evaluations, one using the Boulder set of rules, one using the NC dot set of rules, and see are they about the same? Because Boulder did tweak theirs to be different from the FHWA, whereas NC dot, it sounds like pretty much almost copied and pasted them. Justin, I don't know if I'm interpreting that correctly, but it sounds like that's probably the case.
Dustin Smith with MSO, that's correct.
In which case, I think if they're similar enough, but there are tweaks in the Boulder model that may have affected decisions, then it may be good to compare them back to back, with the NC dot set of guidelines basically being kind of the control group, and the Boulder one being an example of what happens when you take the standard and apply variation to a town that is sort of similar to Lawrence. I mean, Aaron, you can comment how similar it actually is, but in terms of size, being dominated by college, being too expensive to live in, having a lot of, multimodal stuff, kind of similar, right? So, I mean, more similar than, say, like Kansas City, right? So anyway, I think that's why I would personally recommend trying both of these set of guidelines, but not the FHWA one, because I think it's probably very similar to the North Carolina one. So in applying these two tools side by side on a chosen set of intersections, I guess what I'm hoping to find out is, do the guidelines match up? Are there any surprising findings that we see in terms of discrepancies between the two models, or between the models and what is currently planned or has already happened? And I think those discrepancies are what's going to be really interesting about this, to see if, A, are we going down the right path according to the FHWA, or B, a conclusion could be, well, it actually is really important to modify the standard guidelines because there's stuff that the federal government doesn't necessarily understand about ground level stuff that Boulder did understand. So those are the kind of conclusions I'm hoping to draw from these evaluations. And I think then we can probably provide a little bit more, useful feedback. Charlie, does that kind of make sense? Did I address that properly?
I mean, this is Commissioner Bryan. I just heard what I've already heard. So what I'm not hearing is, you mentioned possibly 5 intersections. Well, I'd like to have some discussion about, like, we can't do this on 100 intersections, right? So what are the 5? Why those 5? Like, what's our intent here? Is it to evaluate neighborhood street crossings? Is it to evaluate arterial street crossings? Like, we need to narrow the scope so it's clear what we're trying to accomplish.
I think it's required that, or the idea of these is that it's supposed to be citywide applicable. Is that any intersection marked or unmarked any crossings marked or unmarked in the entire city should be able to be evaluated by this on an apples to apples basis.
So maybe just think more practically, as Commissioner Bryan, staff doesn't have the capacity, I imagine, to evaluate every crossing in the city. So I'd like some discussion about what's the highest priority from staff's perspective or the community's perspective. I mean, clearly there's some value in having a standardized tool, possibly even evaluating multiple tools. But I think before we go there, I'd like some clarity on what's our intention here. Like, are we trying to prioritize crossings near downtown, where we've heard neighborhoods talk about that? Are there other areas? I mean, what's the goal in terms of our capacity? This feels a little bit out of left field to me. So help me put some context on it. Is this to support the Safe Routes to School work? Is it to support the pedestrian plan? Or are we talking about the bike plan? Which crossings are the most important? I'd like, we have data that the MPO has compiled over the years on safety of crossings. Maybe that's a litmus test for where to do this work. But I'd like to have some clarity on, are staff going to spend time evaluating intersections that matter? Or is it intersections that, I guess, who decides what intersections are getting evaluated? And are we talking about 5, 2, 40? Can you help us with that? Thank you.
Dustin Smith with MSO. Yeah, what we envisioned was having these tools to apply to evaluate crossings as a part of CIP projects that included crossings, or bike ped projects that would have crossings, and also in response to resident requests of crossings that have a concern that we need to look into. Yeah, I agree. We definitely don't have the capacity to look at every crossing in town.
So if it's current crossings in CIP projects, do you have a number of those? Is that 20?
Dave Cronin's the engineer. I don't think we have a number. I mean, on any particular given road project, you could have numerous crossings. And we're going to talk about East 23rd Street. Every side street has a crosswalk. It's just, we got several projects next year and a lot in the 5-year plan. So it's, I don't know if we have a number, but we're not trying to go out and identify the locations, but given the locations and the priorities, if it's a priority crossing that rose to the top of the non-motorized project prioritization program, and it's a uncontrolled crossing, what criteria would we use? So we're going to be using that data to hone in on the location of the crossing. And I know there's a lot more work that needs to be done to identify more crossings, because I think that's going to be one of the things we're going to be looking at more, is identifying the locations through data of where we want to add crossings. But this is mainly a tool for projects that are in development, whether it's CIP or bike ped, or even if it's a development project. If it's a private project and it requires a crossing of the street, what would we require of the development to put in?
This is Steve. Charlie, I looked at this in a similar vein to the Complete Streets policy, in terms of a tool that we could use, but probably most importantly that staff could use. And I did see one of the projects we're going to be looking at tonight. It's the first time I recall seeing the Complete Streets policy used to that extent. And that felt really good. And when I look at these tools, I think they're more, like Dave said, as an evaluation tool for projects that have been identified. And I'm sure Jessica and others could talk about how they identify projects around town. I don't look at this necessarily as that kind of a tool. I look at it as more a second tool for evaluating what would be implemented once you got to that point. And primarily because I just don't see the resources with staff to go to this level of detail and, the number of places that, like you say, probably deserve it. Probably would be great, but I don't quite see that being in the picture.
Charlie, I'm going to jump in here for a second. This is Jessica Martinger, Transportation Planning Manager for the MPO. I see this tool being useful in two ways to help. One, our existing roadway projects, CIP or private development projects, incorporating appropriate pedestrian level of comfort in crossing design as it's implemented. One. So if we have standards, we can point to them to say, here's what we need in terms of design to make this crossing more comfortable for people. Because I think that's the end goal, is how do we get crossings that are more comfortable for people. The second way is, which you have identified, this group has said, we want a better way to to identify standalone crossing improvements. So how do we prioritize that? And one of the conversations we had in the bikeway plan development was our desire to develop basically a level of comfort
chart that could evaluate every crossing. The problem in that is if you look very quickly at some of the information that you need about data of travel speed and traffic counts, is we didn't have it. We didn't have an extensive enough data set or the ability to collect it in the short term and or in the long term. I think the implementation of non-motorized or neighborhood traffic management changes that, because as we start collecting speed and volume information throughout neighborhoods, we can start to build some of that data set to be able to start to peg that in and tie those to crossings to say, okay, now tied to these crossings, which crossings meet higher thresholds for less comfort, in which we could identify maybe on an annual basis so many crossings that would be within staff workload to evaluate. So standalone projects could get identified to be added to your non-motorized prioritization. I think this part alone isn't all of it. It's not just creating design standards in this chart. It's also about the other part of it, is which the planning work that we think needs to be done, that we hope to do, or at least start some of that process in 2021 when we get to a pedestrian plan update.
This is Charlie, or Commissioner Bryan. So I'm not disagreeing with anything anybody's saying. I'm simply kind of puzzling over, what is the input that you need from us? Is it, yeah, this is a good idea? Or are you asking something, us to narrow something for you? I'm not hearing what staff is asking of our commission right now, other than, sure, sounds good. I mean, I think we all agree that any kind of tool that helps us evaluate intersections or crossings is probably beneficial. Is it, what exactly do you need from us though tonight?
I'll jump in.
Cronin, city engineer. Yeah, we're working on this. Staff's working on this, and we didn't want to do it without, I guess, just letting the commission and the community know we're looking to do this. And so if there was any opinions out there, whether it's commissioners or the public, that on any guidelines, whether it's ones that we presented or ones that other communities have used, just to see if there's any feedback on those, without just doing it, without instituting this in a vacuum. So we really just started looking at this here in the last couple of months. We've kind of been using the FHWA step countermeasures unofficially as we've looked at crossings to say, okay, well, this kind of fits the criteria. But, I think that, we just felt that we just need to get something on paper and documented. And so we wanted to just have a discussion on what we're working on, and if there was any feedback to get that. So we're not really asking you guys to approve one model or another, but that's kind of where we're at.
Dustin Smith with MSO. I would just add that this kind of discussion we've had is what I was hoping for. Not a specific ask, but just letting everybody see what's out there and provide any feedback you have, and have that kind of, I guess, active discussion, as opposed to us just kind of drafting something and then saying, here it is.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Dustin, if possible, I would still like, I guess first I should ask, I don't know if I got a clear answer. Does the City of Lawrence have access to NACDOT's Urban Street Design Guide? Looks like it's something you have to buy.
Dave Cronin, the engineer, I have a copy of it.
Cool. Okay. Would it be possible to compare it with NACDOT just to make sure that there isn't any kind of almost more planning related stuff and kind of placemaking style guidance? I feel like NACDOT seems to approach things from a different perspective than FHWA does. So I think given our discussions that we've had on past projects, you know, East 19th Street redesign definitely comes to mind. It would be good to see what, I guess, how NACDO has weighed in on this to make sure that we're not missing any kind of cutting edge, more pedestrian focused stuff instead of car focused stuff. And it doesn't look like it's a huge design guide or that they have these complicated matrices, so I'm hoping that's a fairly easy comparison. Just if anything stands out as being wildly different.
Erin Payton, Commissioner. I just wanted to give some input. You had brought up Boulder and whether we could sort of compare that, the North Carolina and the Boulder. And from my experience, I don't actually think Boulder and Lawrence, other than being mid-sized college towns and being very, very similar in population, I think it's something like we have 100,000, Boulder's 107. I think are fairly different when it comes to transportation and comfort. I mean, just based on our experience there, we didn't drive. We walked, we biked, we took the bus, unless we were going to the mountains. So I think they're kind of like what we might strive to be. And I think about probably North Carolina and FHWA are more similar to, you know, just the basic what you might find. So I think that's a great thing to strive for and would be great to look at in Lawrence. But as far as like comparing them, you had mentioned, you know, using 5 intersections, which I think would be incredibly hard because in a lot of ways Lawrence feels like it has 2 development patterns. It has the old development pattern, it has the new development pattern. And I feel like in Boulder they have a modified 1950s development pattern, and any place you have a road, say like Iowa. And I can only think of one, like Iowa, and it's Foothills Parkway. And that road, you wouldn't cross it, you would go under it. And we're not going to have 75 underpasses in Lawrence, but that's not all they have there. I mean, from my experience, the places that you do have to cross are well marked. They're the rapid flashing crossing beacons. So I think it's a great thing to look to and to see how that works, say in intersections here. But if you were only going to look at 5, I think it would be kind of a challenge. And you would really have to look at some of those intersections in town where you already have people walking and how that might change things for comfort. Because I think that'd make a huge difference in this town. I mean, I think that's our biggest, that's the challenge we have here is comfort, the biggest challenge. And then you would have to look at some of these intersections like Iowa, which feels like the Great Divide. So I don't know if that input helps, but I'll throw it out there.
Carol Bowen, Commissioner. I think we need to have some kind of accommodation for land use, especially in our older areas of town. We should not try to do something that we could do out in a new development. And we need to learn to provide the sidewalks in the intersections without paving the whole area. Also, we had kind of a something policy on radius of curvature. And when you have a large radius of curvature, that is hazardous for pedestrians and should be used with caution, especially in the older neighborhoods where everything is a little bit tighter. Let me see, I had another one. That's it for now.
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. So it sounds like I'm hearing a couple of interesting things that I've been sort of pondering but haven't been able to put words to, and that is that the difference between these 2 guidance tools that Dustin, you wrangled up are that one could be considered a little bit more aspirational, or at least for those of us who really support multimodality, which I think is this entire commission. And then the North Carolina Department of Transportation is kind of more business as usual, but just getting in line with, you know, federal guidelines. So I think it'd be really interesting to compare those. I do think that Aaron's point to having 2 different development styles means that we really should try to evaluate intersections in both the old paradigm and the new paradigm. But then finally, to Carol's point, I think that's where that engineering judgment part is going to come in. I'll be really curious to see when evaluating something like 21st and Mass or 7th in Tennessee, which is probably about as old as it gets, would be, do the guidelines tell us that at this kind of intersection, we have to pave over a whole bunch of stuff? or is there a way to fit it within the existing land use pattern? And I'd be really interested to see how that works. Because we may find that what we're hoping will be a one-size-fits-all may end up telling us things that aren't even really possible to do given the context. So I guess we won't really know until we see the evaluations, but I think those will be some interesting conclusions to be able to draw from this pilot study, as it were.
Carol Bowen, Commissioner. Does the city have access to Google's database? And the reason I'm asking is they recently came out with a layer on crosswalks and intersections and house numbers.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I'm not familiar with what Google's come out with recently, but we would have access to whatever anyone else in the general public would have access to. So if there's something out there that they've published that would be important to this conversation, we could look at that.
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Sorry, y'all, I just took a look at the time, and it is 6:02. So we've had such a lively discussion, I have forgot to look at the time in a while. So
I think we're going to have to stop it here, but I really appreciate everybody's input and participation here. And hopefully, Dustin, that kind of helped guide what we might be looking for. I know it's a little bit nebulous at this point, but I think after a couple of evaluations, and I think staff could probably make some engineering judgment on that, then maybe at a future study session or even a regular agenda item, we could kind of see where that has gotten us. So I think with that, thank you, Dustin, for leading us in that discussion. And I guess, shall we meet back at 6:08? I don't know. Is that a reasonable time? Seeing people put down their headphones, I'm going to say yes. So in that case, I will see you all in 5 minutes.
I think as people filter back in, perhaps we could, I guess, get started with the regular meeting, since there's usually a spiel to go over for Zoom logistics. So, Ali, if you want to get that started, I think we can probably just go ahead and kick it off.
Ali,
Unless we have to wait for Dave.
he's got the script, but he's here.
Ah, okay. In that case.
All right. Ready to get started? Okay, all right. Well, we'll get started with our regular meeting. I think Allie's going to start by calling roll for the regular meeting.
Oh, you don't want to go over the spiel again?
No.
Okay. All right. So Ali Weems, MSO, if you're here, say present. All right. Catherine Schartz. Lauren Freeman.
Present.
Thomas Allen. Charlie Bryan. Donna Holteen.
Present.
Steve Evans.
Here.
Carol Bowen.
Here.
Nick Kuzmyak.
Present.
And Aaron Payton. And I'll call Charlie Bryan once more.
Present.
Okay.
I will need to be out of here by 7 though, so just letting you know ahead of time.
All right.
Okay. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. So our first order of business will be to approve the minutes of the November 2nd, 2020 meeting. So before we do that, did anybody have any comment or questions, requests for corrections on those minutes? Carol?
Under public comment, while we don't have to put a lot of detail in it, I think if nothing else, it's a courtesy to put down what topics were brought up. You never know when something like that might need to be referenced. Maybe who brought them up and what the topic was.
I can agree with that. Okay. Yeah, I guess whoever is responsible for putting together the minutes, if that's possible, I think that would be a useful inclusion. So thank you, Carol, for bringing that up. Any other comments
Or questions from the commission? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Tom Allen.
Carol Bowen.
For the minutes.
I second it. Carol Bowen.
Sounds good. Ellie, can you please call roll for this?
So Ali Weems, MSO. Lauren Freeman.
Aye.
Thomas Allen.
Aye.
Charlie Bryan.
Aye.
Donna Holteen.
Aye.
Steve Evans.
Aye.
Carol Bowen.
Aye.
Nick Kuzmyak.
Aye.
And Aaron Payton.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Next is public comment. Is there anybody who has signed up ahead of time to provide public comment? And I don't recall, was there any recent, I don't know if this applied to just the city commission or to all boards that have public comment, but I feel like there was something fairly recently that allowed people to kind of spontaneously give public comment in a meeting rather than having to register. I may not be remembering this correctly, so.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. Yeah, anyone can provide public comment. I know Michael Allman has signed up for this meeting. I don't know if he intended to speak on under public comment or another agenda item. So I would say if Michael or anyone else online would like to provide some public comment, go ahead. And if not, there's no one here in the commission room that is here to provide public comment.
Okay. Michael, did you intend on commenting on general items or on a specific agenda?
Specific agenda item. Thank you. This is Michael Allman.
Okay, sounds good. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. In that case, we are moving on to regular agenda items. So the first one will be to receive the field check plans for the East 23rd Street reconstruction. So Dustin, if you want to take that, we can jump right in.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. This is Dustin with MSO. And yeah, our first item is we're going to review the field check plans. So field check is a design milestone. And so we have those level plans with our consultant tonight. And we've also completed the complete streets checklist, which we mentioned earlier. And generally the project is a full reconstruction of East 23rd Street from the Haskell Bridge to 600 feet east of Anderson Road. For context, that 600 feet east of Anderson Road is currently where the grass median begins or ends, depending on which direction you're traveling. Generally, specifically, the design has been guided by the multi-modal corridor study that was completed on the corridor last year and officially adopted by the City Commission. And I'd like to note before we get started with Paul and the plans is that there will be multiple opportunities for public input on the project going forward, including a virtual public meeting January 13th, and then also a project website that's live where you can view the plans and provide feedback at your leisure, if you will. With that, I'd like to introduce Paul Moore. He's the project manager with Olson, the design consultant on the project. And I think he would like to share screen and then kind of walk us through where he is.
Thanks, Dustin. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Like Dustin said, I'm Paul Moore with Olson. I'm the project manager for the design phase of this project. And we're about halfway through at the field check process, and I've been asked to kind of go over plans a little bit. Let me try to share my screen real quick. See if we can make that work. Can everybody see that one? Okay. Just kind of wanted to talk about the project's adherence to the corridor plan from last year, mainly because this is kind of the main focus of this committee, but primarily we've been able to follow everything in the study in terms of what was recommended, including the shared use paths on both sides of the road. We were able to get those to fit in there. We used a kind of curvilinear alignment for those, both for an more aesthetically pleasing multi-use trail, as well as we needed to dodge a lot of existing utilities out there, including power poles and fiber vaults and sanitary manholes. There was some of both going on there, so it actually worked out pretty well. We were able to reduce the lane widths from 11-foot through lanes. What's out there today is 12-foot through lanes, and there will be 11-foot with this design. The two-way center turn lane will be reduced from 14 to 12-foot per the study. This should keep traffic maybe going a little bit slower in the narrower lanes, and as well provides the benefit of a pretty big cost savings when you're talking about that many feet of width change over a mile. So it's kind of a win-win, considering this project is no longer going to be K10, so it's a good time to do this. We're going to reduce the speed limit from Harper East. We'll be going 45 miles an hour, and Harper West will be 35. So that'll help kind of get people slowed down in this corridor, make it a little more appealing. The excess management, per the study, we were going to introduce median islands at the major intersections, these narrow median islands where we have left turn lanes, dedicated left turn lanes. They're 4 foot wide, and we implemented those for the left turn lanes, say at Harper and at Haskell and a couple other locations. So that'll provide additional safety in those intersections, as well as prevent some driveways that are really close to those intersections from allowing lefts to turn out of there onto 23rd. We're also implementing bus stops in the locations where they are today that I've showed on this slide at Haskell, Ponderosa, Silicon, and Harper. They'll all be near side stops, and one of those is a relocation from a far side stop. I believe that's the Harper one. So those are all going to be 6 by 20 pads. They will have a sidewalk connection to the multi-use trail in every instance. Can pull up the plans here. If you had a chance to look at these, I'll kind of talk about kind of how this is organized. We have a title sheet, and then the second sheet is a overall 2-pane view of the entire project. And then if you zoom in here, if you're looking at a certain area, you can see at sheet number 30, it would be the zoomed in version of that particular area later in the plans. This is just kind of a key to get your bearings if you're not used to looking at engineering plans. Sometimes they're hard to visualize for people that aren't working with these every day. This is a plan sheet starting on the west end of the project, north is up. And this is the end of the previous project that built the new bridge over the old rail line there, and then trail system just west of Haskell. So that's where the project starts. And then moving forward to the east, you have the Haskell intersection. We're putting in a brand new traffic signal here to replace the old one. That's probably the biggest highlight of this. You can start to see the median islands here, if you can see my cursor, and that'll, separate those left turners from the oncoming traffic the other direction. Pretty typical application for a road of this size to have those type of median islands. Moving forward, in terms of access management, we've tried to introduce some smaller median islands here as well to try to control what's going on. We've got Quick Trip on the north side here with my cursor, Sonic on the south side, numerous entrances. We're trying to control how many people are able to turn out of there while also maintaining access to these businesses. So Sonic, for example, we're allowing people to turn left into there from the westbound direction, and obviously they can turn in from the right as well. But we're having to restrict left turns coming out of Sonic just due to the proximity of the left turn lane at the main intersection of Haskell there, and what's going on with on the north side with Quick Trip. So the Quick Trip, we were not able to provide a left out of that entrance off 23rd. However, they do have nice access off of Haskell with a light. So if someone wants to get to Quick Trip, they have nice access. If they were going eastbound, they can turn left at Haskell to get into Quick Trip. So this is kind of a more challenging area for us to try to maintain access to everyone while maintaining a safe corridor as well. I can kind of just step through this a little bit. You can see the meandering multi-use trail on both sides. This also shows a new storm sewer as well, which probably you might not be interested in, but let's see. Here's Harper. Once again, we've introduced the left turn bays, protective median, 4 foot wide. It'll have kind of a stamped brick pattern in between. That's what we're proposing right now. That's something we can change in the plans if we need to. But let's see, moving on to the east some more. I forgot to point out the bus stops. Like for example, right here, this near side bus stop. This would be for eastbound 23rd Street, 6 by 20 pad with a connection to the trail. Same thing on the opposite near side. That's just kind of what those look like for now. I'm just providing a nice concrete area. The city can install a shelter or bench or trash receptacle, whatever is required there. That'll be a big upgrade in some of these areas. The old bus stop at Harper was on the far side, and the study recommended relocating that to the near side. So we're able to do that. Harper will not be getting a new signal, but a modification of the existing. So the 4 main poles will remain, and we'll have to upgrade the pedestrian push buttons for the new sidewalk ramp layouts, but so it won't be as major of a job there at Harper. Moving on here a little bit, just east of Harper, we used to have that really long dedicated right turn lane. We've gone ahead and added a bump out between these 2 entrances. Instead of just having that run straight through, we're gonna have a little bump out, so it forces the motorists to go into that entrance and not be able to continue on to the second entrance without being in the main outside through lane. That's kind of a safety thing. If somebody's trying to turn right out of this one and you see somebody coming in that right turn lane, their expectation is that that person's going to turn right. But the way it is now, the person could just keep going and T-bone them. So try to clean that up a little bit. On the, excuse me, on the east end of the project, it's kind of hard to see here, but this is the old grass median that Dustin talked about. This is the east end of the job. So we're transitioning back to that section, and we're going to introduce a dedicated left, protected left for this property on the south. It's basically, I think, some apartments that will, if you look at the next sheet, it's kind of confusing, but there's going to be a taper off here and a dedicated left that they can get over, and I'll move back a sheet here now, and safely make that left turn. Today it's pretty precarious. If you try to make that left, you come right out of that median divided section and have to immediately get over, and this should clean that area up quite a bit. We also provided the pavement marking plans, which sometimes makes it easier to visualize the lane configuration for everybody. It's 3 different panes, at a little bit different scale, but upper left is the west end of the job, and it kind of just goes across and then starts over again in the middle, if you're not familiar with this type of a layout. And there's a second sheet, kind of does the same thing. So it just works down the project, and you can see the lane configurations. We've dimensioned the lane widths and such. So this is sometimes easier to follow. Some of the proposed signing is on here as well. And that's pretty much it for the plans. I'll be available for questions if anybody has any questions, and I can run that from my end if you like. Dustin or Dave, do you have anything else to add before I quit?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I just would add that, you know, these plans follow the layout of the corridor study again, and so that in the staff memo, there's a link back to that corridor study that was done in 2019, which kind of has some more. It's more graphical in nature, but these engineering plans follow that concept plan that was created. So for the most part, we're just executing that plan and all of the engagement that was done to get to that plan.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I have a quick question for, I guess, the clarification for myself, because I don't believe I was here the last time this was brought to the commission, and we have a couple of new people on the commission as well that could benefit from kind of a history lesson. Paul, could you kind of explain, based on the corridor plan, I see an option A and an option B that I guess were presented during the Charette's sessions, and there are comments on both. And then there's the illustrative corridor plan, which appears to be basically kind of a very rough draft of what we're seeing here. So I guess my general questions are, what were the kind of high points of the differences between option A and B? How did that discussion go? And which did we end up with, I guess, if any, as the more chosen design?
Okay.
Or is it a total combination of them?
I was not personally involved in that, although Olson did do this study. One of my colleagues did. In the back of the document, there was a, what do they call it here? Is this preferred alternative, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
That's what we're designing from. So let me find, yeah, recommendations and implementation. So it's section 4. That's the set of drawings that is guiding what we're doing in terms of the concept. So
Okay.
the history of the other stuff, Dustin may be able to help on that, but I don't know that it's, I mean, if he has the answer to that, that'd be great. But if not, I don't think it's a big deal. But Dustin, do you remember the history on that?
This is Dustin Smith with MSO. Unfortunately, I was not involved at that stage of the study either.
Dave Cronin, I can't speak to the differences between A and B. I know we looked at different bike facilities and widths as we went through the design charrette. So I think they're pretty similar, but yeah,
Jessica Mortinger, MPO Transportation Planning Manager. As part of this MPO funded study, we went through the design charrette, started the process basically with just existing data. And both of these concepts were drawn
out based on feedback from the participants in the charrette. So these became the 2 options that basically, that's why these drawings look like something somebody, you know, they're a little bit fancier than hand drawings, but they were literally drawn by hand at the event. And based on the feedback of the staff and what you see in the comments, then comes to kind of the consensus building that this process yielded with a preferred alternative that was then later written into a report. So the conversation vetted things in the process with property owners, like business property owners, with Haskell, with neighborhood representation, kind of in a process where we could all come to one preferred design alternative. Things like what bike or ped amenities are appropriate, what type of transit amenities should be there, what type of access management do we need to explore? Do we need to look at dual left turn lanes or right turn lanes? Do we need to, and so out of kind of the reality of what is available in the existing condition, you'll see also in the illustrative list, like a preferred to bury all the utility like electric power poles. And so those were all conversations that got had in the process to kind of get down to a final concept design. So once Olson was hired to do the design work, it really was about designing that preferred alternative as opposed to having a conversation about what elements needed to be there and doing multiple designs at that part.
Kuzmyak, MMTC. Thanks a lot for that background. I think it just kind of helps me figure out how we got to where we are, and hopefully that was of some use to the newer members of the commission. And I would say the main reason I brought it up is because of a project that happened before my time that was also on the Complete Streets checklist, I believe, or maybe it was before, the reconstruction of Castle Avenue, where there were a couple of different options. And I don't know if the Complete Streets checklist was out at this time, but I think the 2 main options were kind of the status quo and the more multimodal version of it. And from what I recall, it was the status quo version that was chosen, despite it not necessarily being as complete of a street, because that's what the public wanted, or staff or city commission. I don't exactly recall, but the fact that there was kind of these competing objectives of, do we prioritize just cars or do we prioritize other users? It just kind of, this particular corridor plan reminds me of at least what I've heard of the Castle Drive
Jessica
history.
Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. I would say, Nick, while I think they both had the goal to design major arterial streets or redesign them, these processes that we conducted to do these public engagement were very, very different. This one was more organic and collaborative, where people who were in the process participating built it with the design team. The other one took some options that were, you know, formed and presented something A and B option kind of to the public before it evolved. So I think we kind of used that as a lesson as we grew to kind of figure out how to better do this type of vision making for corridors. And of course, the availability of the federal funding helped do that process.
Okay, well, that certainly helps connect the dots and tries to connect these projects to each other. So certainly good to hear that we've kind of learned from the past and I guess how to better conduct public engagement. So I'll certainly be curious as this project goes forward to see what kind of citizen comment comes back and to see if the process was worth the effort, because so far it sounds like it has been. So I'll be curious to see at the conclusion if people do feel like they've all been given a fair shake. So anyway, thank you for kind of bringing me up to speed on that. I would like somebody else to comment at this point.
Carol Bowen, Commissioner. I have a question. If we're going to be putting in islands and turn lanes, how obvious will this be to the driver visually? Are they going to have difficulty? See, 31st Street, I think, is really awful with all those curbs and islands. Is that what's going to happen on East 23rd?
I'm not, this is Paul Moore with Olson. I'm not sure about the details of the 31st Street project, but what we're implementing here on 23rd is very typical for our arterial roadway, the raised median, we call it, with curbs on both sides and a different color in the middle. It's a lot of times they're kind of a reddish color to simulate brick, or they're actual brick, but they're very visible.
I have another question. How are pedestrians going to cross this street? And how often do they have the option?
Pedestrians will be able to cross at every signalized intersection. So that means we just have the two, Harper and Haskell. So we have dedicated crosswalks, push buttons with the signal heads on all 4 directions. It's the same locations, I think, that they're able to cross today.
Carol Bowen again. Will they have any kind of a pedestrian island halfway across? It's a wide street.
No, ma'am, they will not have a pedestrian refuge. In order to do that, you would have to have a wider section, roadway section. Those pedestrian refuges need to be 6 feet wide minimum. That would be in addition, to the room we already need to make the left turn for the car. So that was not part of the study, so it's not included. The lanes are narrower, so it's less of a distance to cross than it is today.
This is Dave Kern, City Engineer. I'd also add that we typically don't design pedestrian
islands for signalized crossings that you're not going to stop halfway and then cross the other half of the street. At least not in this situation. So there wouldn't be a pedestrian refuge, that you would cross the street half of the time between signal phases. So.
This is Steve. Can I jump in? A quick question and then a couple of follow-ups. Do the western limits of this project go to the Burroughs Trail, the intersection with the Burroughs Trail?
Not quite. Let me find that here for you. So here's the new bridge.
Yeah, there we go.
Trail system. So there's the existing pavement on our project is asphalt, and the project that built that bridge is concrete. So it's right there at that joint is where we're taking off. So that good concrete pavement, we're going to keep going with that to the east.
Okay. Well, for some reason, I recalled a discussion about access from the Burroughs Trail to, both the north and south sides of the shared use paths. And it looks like that's outside of the scope. I don't know. I'd probably have to look at it a little closer. It looks like from the north side, there looks like pretty good access eastbound. On the other side, I'm not sure that's the case. And I think that would be something, I know it's outside of the scope of what you're doing, Paul, but maybe for us, looking at how you get from the Burroughs Trail eastbound on the south side of 23rd. You can see it right there.
Yeah.
I don't see how you would do that without getting in the ramp, and I wouldn't want to do that. So that's kind of a something to look at in the future, I guess. I think my question about what's within the scope of your work, Paul, is all of the entrances. You know, if you look at the entire, I mean, gee, there's entrances, what, every 50, 100 feet. And I'm trying to visualize a bicycle and maybe even pedestrians, which I think in the future, if and when the East Hills and all that gets developed, this could be a pretty heavily used shared use path for bikes. And it may not be within the scope of what you're doing, but we were talking about crosswalks quite a while during our study session. And I'm just kind of wondering if now is the time to look at all of those potential conflict points between bikes and turning vehicles, and gee, it could get pretty complicated. I wonder if Dave, Dustin, and Jessica could comment on that briefly, if that's appropriate.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of driveways in this corridor. And so I think, you know, when we were looking at bike facilities, you know, that's the challenge with the shared use path is the conflicts with turning movements at driveways. And so, we ended up putting them on both sides of the street too. So you have the choice of whether or not you're going with traffic or not on a shared use path. I don't think we've looked at any other details at this point with specific enhancements at any driveways. At least not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, this is Paul Moore Bolson again. In the study phase, there's a section there that talks about potential consolidation of some driveways with redevelopment. Jessica probably remembers that. But we looked at it in terms of this project, and it doesn't really seem feasible with the way the properties are now and who needs access where, that any can be consolidated without redevelopment, unfortunately. But I think if some of these areas do redevelop, there would be an opportunity to consolidate.
Well, I fully understand what's going on here. We're talking about the existing fabric of Lawrence, which used to be a highway here. Yeah. And there's some constraints there. I fully understand. I also want to promote the use of peds and bikes on here too. And so I think at some point that's going to have to be addressed because there's a lot of potential here for conflict. And I'm sure you guys understand that and are fully aware of it. So.
Yep.
Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager for the MPO. We had a lot of conversations during the charrette about dedicated on-street bike infrastructure, like bike lanes, or what buffered bike lane, a buffered facility or cycle track might look like on this street. And in that conversation, it was kind of weighed against a shared use path, and some similar conversations about being on one side of the street versus another, thinking about truck turning movements and using, you know, if you provide that space in street, how trucks and other vehicles might use it and how that competes with usage. So I think a lot of those concepts around safety at crossings were vetted. There were conversations about 6th Street shared use path as an example of thinking about driveway access along shared use path paths. And so I think this was a really, it's a challenging concepts. And I think people tested some of that conversation, and the end result was the compromise of a shared use path that had some meandering features, but that also respected and recognized safety at crossings as best as possible.
Thank you. That's all I have at this stage.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I had a couple of questions for Paul and I guess staff as well. The first two are just kind of, I guess, silos related. So the first one is there any way to work with transit and Adam Weigel to maybe include some adders once we get to the point of actually having a bid tab to maybe get some bus stop amenities? It does seem that if you buy in bulk, or if you add these things while the general contractor is already in site, it could be cheaper to do. So since there's a current push in PTAC to try to get more amenities at bus stops, and that's not currently in your guys' scope, but I mean, is there a way to at least add that as an option if a general contractor was able to also provide shelters or benches or bike racks or something like that? Or is that completely out of scope of this particular project?
Dave Cronin, city engineer, that's completely in scope. I think we anticipate those being included in the public improvement plans.
Okay,
and so,
cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. My second question is,
I don't know if I'm remembering his name correctly. Evan Corinta, the ADA compliance, I guess, expert for Lawrence, has he been involved in the design of this at all? I'd be kind of curious to see what he thinks, I guess, especially regarding the crossing. So I think what Carol brought up was an interesting point, and it's something I kind of struggle to do, because as an able-bodied person, it's pretty easy to cross, 100 feet in 15 seconds or whatever, but that's not how everybody gets around. So I'd be curious to see if Evan has any input as to if it's actually necessary to extend these medians such that they're a pedestrian refuge for those who can't cross the street in time, or if it's really not even a problem. So anyway, just a suggestion. The third thing is, and this is kind of a deeper question, so if others have more kind of cut and dry things in the meantime, feel free, but I'm kind of curious, Paul, from your perspective, I know as an engineer myself, we usually just think about design and construction, but the ongoing maintenance of something, I think, has a huge effect for our clients. And in that respect, I think the design of a road and its amenities can definitely affect how maintenance is done later. And you kind of alluded to that in terms of lane widths. So like going down from 12 feet to 11 feet means that's less, I don't know if lane feet is the right metric, but it's less asphalt that you have to maintain. So I'm kind of curious, given how things have been reconfigured here, are there any considerations for maintenance that either will increase, I guess, O&M costs or decrease? So I'm thinking, for example, is the pavement area of the road, is that increased or decreased? Are there more stoplights than there used to be? Is the new SUP going to have implications for how much it costs to clear snow from it? Is the landscaping going to require a lot of attending? And if there is greater or less pavement, does that affect the stormwater sizing? I don't know, just a couple of thoughts, and I'd be curious to see if you've given that thought yet.
Yeah, this is Paul Moore with Olson. The pavement area is definitely going down, particularly between Harper and Haskell is where it gets the narrowest. Where we had to introduce the left turn islands, the overall width of the road ends up being about the same as it was before, but the lanes are narrower. The wash came out in the width of the median, but in the island part, excuse me. But from Haskell to Harper in that area, the overall width is narrower than existing for a long stretch. So there is an overall decrease. So that's less upfront cost. It's less, maintenance of that. I think we're going with concrete pavement. So that's a plus. The maintenance of the landscaping, I think that's got to be an increase because you don't have any city landscaping there now. I think it's all private, whatever's out there. other than that, I'm not thinking of maintenance type scenarios that, I mean, oh, you asked about the signals. The signals, there's only 2 signals on the project today, and that's all we're going to have when we're done. One's going to get replaced. It's bad enough shape that it needs replaced. The other one's just going to get modified to the new lane configurations and crosswalk configurations. So the bulk of that Harper one will remain. So there's, I guess that's it on the signals.
Okay. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. So it seems to me that when kind of taken in aggregate, that these changes are probably going to result in a decrease of ownership costs for the city over its lifespan, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I did want to mention one thing as far as maintenance goes.
He maintains shared use paths. So we are taking on a considerable amount of shared use path with this project and having them on both sides of the road. So, you know, there is probably a net decrease in pavement, street pavement, but there will be an increase in maintenance of those shared use paths. So if they were sidewalks, we would not be maintaining them.
So Dave, does that fall under Parks and Rec then, or does that fall under MSO?
Dave Cronin, city engineer, Parks and Rec maintains
So
shared use paths.
I guess if you haven't already talked to Derek, it might not be a bad idea, I guess, to see if he's aware that there's going to be a whole lot of assets added to his inventory.
Dave Cronin's the engineer, Parks and Rec, and all other departments are involved in the review process. And we are very, very early. We literally just got the plans on Friday, so these are got them out as quick as we could, and they're still being developed. So we're going to be doing our official field check review here in the next month with all of city staff, and then, you know, as we mentioned earlier, having that public meeting in January. So yeah, we will certainly get input from Parks and Rec on landscaping and shared use paths.
Cool, thank you. Thank you, Kuzmyak, and TC chair. That I think satisfies quite a bit of what I was interested in. So thanks.
Jessica, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, Jessica Morton, MPO, Transportation Planning Manager. I was just going to say that Parks and Rec was consulted in the development of this plan because they commented on things like landscaping and tree choices and other things. So this should not be a surprise to them.
That's excellent. I think I'm not so much worried that they won't be prepared for the fact that it's here. It's just that their maintenance budget seems kind of stretched already. And I guess it's just a theme that's come up, I think, a decent amount in the past year of our MMTC meetings, and that's that it's great to get this new infrastructure, but if we don't plan for the future with increased maintenance budgets to go with the increased infrastructure, it may not look so good in 5-10 years. So it's kind of the reason I keep bringing up maintenance. By the way, I can't see everybody who's on this just because of the way the view is on my screen. So if you do have something to say, feel free to just start. You don't have to ask for permission or anything.
I have a quick question. This is Lauren Freeman, Commissioner. It was mentioned that the speed limit is going to be reduced here. Will that be like, will the design at all encourage that as well? I'm curious if like the medians or narrower road will help with that. Just because I know that people often speed on this road, I drive it a lot. And so kind of reducing it, I'm curious how people will respond to that.
Paul Moore with Olson. In some instances, you can get some traffic calming effect from narrower lanes. Other times, not so much. I've seen it both ways. In theory, you would get some traffic calming with a little bit narrower, but 11 foot's still a pretty decent width lane. 12 foot's huge. It's designed for trucks and such. So, but I think overall it will be good. Yeah, as far as the speeding, you know, we're designing the vertical geometry, you know, the crests and the sags for the lower speed limit in that section as well. So it should feel like that, you know, that design speed should be felt that way too. But it's still a straight road, and I guess if people want to speed, they're going to do it unless we get more law enforcement out there.
Does anybody else on the commission have anything to add? Donna?
Don, team commissioner, I just wondered if the lanes to the east are 11 foot now, or I'm sorry, to the west.
Can you repeat that, please?
The from Haskell heading west, are those 11-foot driving lanes now?
Paul Moore, Olson, I think they are 12. I think it's all based, I mean, KDOT builds 12-foot lanes, so that's what's, I believe, is out there. In fact, the old continuous left, I think, is 14 feet wide, it's striped, so it's really wide. So we're knocking that down to 12, and then the lanes to 11. So it'd be a nice cost savings from a construction standpoint for sure, for a mile long, almost a mile long road.
Thanks.
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Do you know if there was any discussion of going even smaller for the 35-mile-an-hour section, or given the traffic throughputs on the road, was that kind of off the table?
Paul Moore, Olson, Jessica, I think there might have been some discussion in the study on that, but I don't recall.
Yeah, Dave might be able to speak to it a little better. Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager for the MPO. We had conversation about speed. It was one of the tools, and we talked about land form and how that and lane width and how that impacts speed also, in terms of just design expectations. But there was some concern about the width because of truck movement through this corridor, about going too narrow for other safety issues.
Makes sense. Okay.
Does anybody else have
Any final comments? I think at this point we're really just meant to receive this. There's no true action item, so I'll hear some final comments, and I think we can close this out. Not hearing any. All right. Well, in that case, thank you, Paul, very much for going over this with us, and Dustin as well. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any public comment on this? I completely forgot about that. Is there any public comment?
There is, by Michael Allman, if I may.
I almost missed you. Yep. Go ahead, Michael. You have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you. And I'm representing Sustainability Action Network. Historically, you had asked a question about the various options A, B, and C. I was at the design charrette, and some of the options I remember that were being discussed, for example, was doing a striped median versus a raised median, having a bicycle track, not SUP, but a bicycle track on the south side that would be striped two-directional, two-way, which, you know, bicycle track is. But the choice was made to do two SUPs on north and south instead of that. As far as the driveways to the various businesses, as well as intersections, there was discussion, a lot of discussion, as I recall, about the potential conflict, like Commissioner Evans has brought up, and what to do about that conflict, particularly when there are trucks involved in this pretty heavy corridor. One of the options that was discussed was having raised crossings at every, you know, for the SUP at every driveway. So that was part of the discussion. At this point, there's nothing to differentiate at any of those driveways that there's a bikeway crossing. I think it's a terrible oversight, particularly considering that right now in the capital improvement plan for Lawrence, there's a $382,000 project to put green crossing stripes for every bikeway that crosses a major driveway as well as an intersection. This corridor this is a great plan and a great opportunity to take our transportation planning to the next level, way beyond Castle. I'm glad to see this happening. It's going to be a model that we might be following, and I think it should be done right the first time, considering that green crossings are already on the table and accepted. There should be no question that it's accepted and put into this, as well as the intersections, but certainly the driveways. The other concern I have is that west of Harper, the SUPs are only 8 feet. East of Harper, they're 10 feet. Like I said, this is going to be a model. I don't think we should be skimping on bicycle facilities and focused more on automobiles. All the SUPs should be 10 feet. And I want to echo Commissioner Evans' concern that somebody on the Burroughs Creek Trail that wants to go east, they would have to go to the north SUP and somehow cross 23rd Street to the south, and then continue east. It's just very awkward and potentially dangerous. I think there should be some way to figure out how to take the south SUP down that ramp to the Burroughs Creek Trail off to the side of the vehicle pavement. So yeah, we're reinventing a whole corridor here, and I think it's really important that we look at all the considerations in a multimodal way, which would give due consideration to bicycles and pedestrians. So, and transit, yeah, bus turnouts, for example. They were mentioned in the charrette, but not included except the one that exists east of Harper, as I recall. I think that's all, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. This is Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Dave and/or Paul, I would like you guys to comment, if possible, on the idea of having green pavement markings on the crossings for bike paths, because I know that there is funding for a decent amount of them, but I don't recall if that funding is for every single bike crossing in town, or if it's planned. I feel like we had this discussion last time, and it's, you know, out of my brain currently. But is there additional funding for what is sure to be a probably well-used SUP here to make it green, basically?
Cronin, city engineer. Yeah, we haven't looked at yet about the green bicycle pavement marking project. I think we anticipated those pavement markings for street crossings and not all driveways, but nonetheless, there would be certainly be a cost to doing any colored crossing at driveways. I don't think that I don't recall us discussing that with the corridor study. I'd have to look back at that, but it would probably be more appropriate to have it on a driveway a colored pavement than a pavement marking, than a green pavement marking that you're going to have to maintain and go out and restripe every few years. And driveways are treated a little differently than street crossings, so I think it's a good note that we will look at what we can do for improving the visibility of the driveways. So we'll take a look at that and probably go back and look at our discussion with the corridor plan on that, and then as well as the connectivity on the south side to the Burrow Creek Trail. I don't recall discussing that, and I think there would be some obstacles with the topography in the street and the retaining wall that are there, but we can certainly look into the feasibility of that as well. I just don't recall that discussion from the study.
Thanks, Dave. Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Paul, could you please comment on the,
I guess, discrepancy between the width of the shared use paths and that in some spots they're 8 feet and some spots they're 10 feet? Is that due to utility conflicts?
Paul Moore with Olson. Yeah, that came directly out of the study. I think Jessica might know the history on that.
Jessica Morton, Transportation Planning Manager. It's my understanding that that width was about available right away. I could be wrong though. So Dave, if it wasn't that.
Dave Cronin, that's my recollection.
But don't hold me to it.
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Yeah, in that case, it sounds similar to
The Naismith shared use path, and that it really can only be so wide due to how the right of way works and having to have a buffer in between the street and the path itself. So it sounds like there are pretty clear dimensional constraints that you had to work within. So does anybody have any other further comments before we close this item out? Carol.
On the sidewalks, I just thought of it when I heard all this conversation about driveways. I still see that driveways are dominating the slope of the sidewalk, and they should not. The sidewalk should not dip at every driveway. That's my opinion.
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. I have a feeling that has something to do with either parking, loading, and access standards, or something else that probably has some kind of maximum slope that a driveway can be. I don't really know. I mean, if for example, you told all businesses that their driveway couldn't dip more than, I don't know, 3 inches below the elevation of the sidewalk, is there something that they could point to and say, no, it has to be exactly this slope entering a business? And I certainly don't know that answer.
But what you have is you have a sidewalk that's level, and you have the apron that adjusts to it, and then the driveway on the other side.
Right. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what set of policies or ordinances does that even fall under? Is that in parking loading access standards? Is that in some kind of MSO sidewalk guidance document I'm not familiar with? Dave, you can probably shed some light on this.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I'm confused with what the question is. We do have standard commercial driveway details, and the sidewalk will be at a consistent grade adjacent to each driveway. So it'll go through the driveway approach at the same grade. So as far as dipping down, it won't come down to meet a driveway. The driveway will come up to meet the sidewalk, to meet the shared use path. So that's our standard typical application, unless there's some other constraints that dictate otherwise. That's the standard design that we've implemented. And all cross slopes of all sidewalks and shared use paths through driveways will meet ADA no more than 2%. We use a 1.5% as a maximum. So all of that will be addressed in the profile of the driveway design. But I think that answered the question, but if not, please clarify.
Yes, that answers the question. I'm just kind of watching to see if we actually changes or if I'm still having trouble communicating my concern.
Steve, I see you're unmuted. Do you have a final thought? Okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to close down this item. I think we've had a pretty good discussion here. Hopefully, city staff and Olson have what they need to continue with the design. I think it looks pretty solid so far. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Dustin. With that, let's move on to item 2, which is consider approving the proposed data-driven process to identify sidewalk improvement routes for the annual Sidewalk Improvement Program. Jessica, this is yours, right? No, Jake? Who?
There we go. Okay. So Jake Baldwin's also here this evening to help answer questions about the Sidewalk Improvement Program. I'm Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager at the MPO. We're here on version number 2. with you to bring you kind of the options you looked at in October in response to the data-driven process to identify sidewalk improvement. So this is a pretty similar presentation. I've now filled it in with some pictures from what you've seen in October to hopefully address the concerns you had and what you wanted to look at for our continued discussion about how we would weight transportation, potentially weight transportation disadvantaged into the scoring matrix. So our outcome in this goal is to identify for year 3 of sidewalk improvement and beyond a methodology to select a routing network for areas to enforce sidewalk maintenance and inspection. If you again remember, you looked at this in October, we're here today in December, and then when I originally published this agenda, we thought we were going to December 15th City Commission. We realized that's not going to work, and we are going to be out at a future City Commission meeting after you have given us guidance to have something more specific to take to them, and then we'll be looking at probably at this point a January inspection for MSO for the 2021 Sidewalk Improvement Program. So the model takes the opportunity to identify all the destinations listed there, K through 12 schools, park entry points, public attractions, public transit stops, government institutions, health, daycare, higher education, nonprofit, and retail. These are all the same destinations that are identified in the non-motorized prioritization policy. It takes each of those destinations and finds within a mile all of the residential origins that could route to those. And then it takes basically, based on these different network components, a weighted route to make a route from every origin, like you saw here, all these origins to a destination, and then puts that together in a shortest route path composite. And so that we talked about before. Here is an example of that with only the schools, K through 12 in our community as an example to show you. So it takes, here's all of the routes. You can see by line thickness as the routes start to add up. In this, I didn't do this for every destination. There's too many components kind of to put together as we start adding this, but schools we thought were a good example because we have them prioritized the highest in the non-motorized prioritization policy. Following that, you'll see on this slide is the exact same thing kind of you saw on those 2 example slides of destinations. And this is where the routes are prioritized by closeness of proximity. So this follows this kind of the same chart that we've done in non-motorized prioritization, which is to weight closer trips with a higher value, greater frequency and likelihood of being taken kind of in our pedestrian demand model. Again, this is just K through 12 schools. When we get into the later model, you're going to see this added up for all of the destinations that we've combined together, and it's taken us lots and lots of hours to run on the model. So here again reminds you of the weighting that we've given for priority trips and in all of the different categories that follows non-motorized prioritization. And as a result, we get a composite route score. And so this is divided by 8 equal colors. You can't see that. You can't necessarily see each year in that, but ideally over a scale to be able to really identify where you're looking at hotspots where we assume there to be high levels of pedestrian demand based on all of those trips from the origins to all the identified destinations kind of put into a composite. We talked about last time the conversation about looking at our census data provided pedestrian transportation disadvantaged populations based on income, minority, person who has a disability, less than a high school diploma, single parent households, households without vehicles, youth, and senior citizens. From some national work that we've done and also work at the MPO to try to start to identify populations that might have disadvantages related to multimodal transportation in terms of providing access and choice. And this is kind of where we've ended up in that. And so what I showed you at the last meeting was the Douglas County averages. We went back and recalculated that for this process based on Lawrence. And so you can kind of see there shows you basically based on all of those block groups what the average was, and then what points were assigned for each of those categories as we go to the total scores that we'll look at on this map. So the higher above the average that a block group was, the higher the points it was assigned, that it starts to show consideration when we're talking about equity in ways that we might want to start choosing to prioritize areas to give greater advantage to people where there's a larger predominance of those populations residing. And that's what that map looks like. It looks a little bit different than the one you saw last month because that was based on, again, county averages. So what we've done is we begin to take that. This is, again, the same thing I've showed you before, which I've shown as option 1. I put them all 3 together so we can kind of look at them. You might have to look at them on your screen and flip back and forth kind of between them to pay attention. I think the area that's most obvious that you can start to see where this changes, and I'm going to point with that cursor to show you that, is think about this 6th and Wakarusa area. And because if you recall this map, the areas where they're red, that's the areas that are going to be pulled to greater demand when you have the weighting and the more extreme weighting. So think about those red areas as the ones you're going to watch in terms of how they move, but also this 6th and Wakarusa area where you see there's not a lot of transportation disadvantage calculated, that's where you'll see the most of the demand pull from, which would be the priority. And so that's kind of where I would suggest those areas, thinking about 23rd and Iowa, and 6th and Wakarusa is kind of to watch as we watch these shifts happen. So again, here's option 1, which is the composite route scores. This has no weighting in it. Here's an option where we've taken the scoring and to equalize it to the scores that were already assigned based on all the range of the segment scores that happened as the result of the weighting based on proximity to destinations. We tripled the disadvantage scoring that was on that chart and added it to the route score. And so you can see, and I'm going to flip back and forth here, so hopefully I don't make everybody sick. Again, the 6th and Wakarusa area, thinking about how some of this along this corridor and some of this along this corridor in terms of where there was less perceived, transportation disadvantage from that census data has shifted. So again, that's option 1. And you'll see in option 2 how that's, you saw there's a lot more density of red in this area in terms of demand and a lot less here. We then took this option as kind of another weighting option, which is to weight it even further. And we basically did it exponentially by multiplying the transportation disadvantage score times the route score. And this has a more extreme weighting to transportation disadvantage. And again, I'm going to have to flip between all 3 of them, but pay attention to kind of, you'll see how much more density of red you have in some of these areas where there was more perceived transportation disadvantage versus look at 6th and Wakarusa and kind of the west side out here where there is now almost no kind of red by that weighting. So I'm going to go back through these again. Here's 3. Here's 2, and here's 1. So that's kind of, I hope this is what you were looking for in terms of us providing you some choices, in terms of seeing what the model output based on we, kind of agreed in concept. It sounded like a good move towards a data-driven process to prioritize routes. And then looking at what it would mean if we're really talking about looking at some of the data we were provided by the census as a way to possibly prioritize areas where we might assume there could be pedestrian demand that's about people's access to opportunities and choices. So I'd be happy to go back and look at any of these. Of course, these are all on the agenda packet. I also didn't include in this presentation, but we can have some additional conversation. That was there. In the documentation we provided, and we talk about this in the methodology, and we can help answer some of these questions if you want. As staff works to identify what areas get selected in year 3 as part of this model, we're agreeing to the methodology as staff goes to implement this. I put all of these options with the white areas, which that's year 1 and year 2 in this program. So those areas have already been inspected and repaired in year 1 and 2. So just to give you a feel kind of where that's already happened. And then also to show you with the blue where we've added where that's attributes we know that are brick sidewalks. And at this point in time, year 3 is not going to be able to address brick sidewalks. It's going to be wait till a future year because there's a subcommittee working on brick street and sidewalk standards, and they need to complete their work and recommendations around that before we feel like those standards can be set to hold people to that for enforcement of brick sidewalks. But that's in here for all the options. It just kind of gives you a perspective about where we've been so far and what we're looking at doing. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have, a discussion and feedback, or go look at anything else that I've shown you today.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I'd like to open it up to the Commission. Carol, I saw your hand raised, so I'll start with you. But since I can't see everybody, as long as you're respectful, feel free to jump in with your comments and questions. So, Carol, please kick it off.
Carol Bowen, Commissioner. Jessica, refresh my memory. I really like this model, by the way. Have we considered traffic volume anywhere? And the reason I'm bringing that up is if I were to compare 2 neighborhoods, Centennial for one, Centennial has a lot of through traffic. That they're streets, everybody's going everywhere. There's a lot of automobile traffic. Indian Hills, however, had some streets with lots of through traffic, but a lot of streets did not. Is that any of the need? I guess I'm looking for need. What neighborhoods need to be addressed and what kind of detail?
So two things I think points to make in that. And while traffic volume is not a direct input into the model, there's 2 ways of where it correlates and plays into the model and how I think it's addressed. The first is when we are identifying both the origins and destinations and the routes along those to figure out where that trip making is happening based on the model, right? It's an estimate. The model is choosing streets kind of based on this preference and criteria, recognizing how routes may be taken in places. So if there is no alternative lower volume, lower street, lower, like more perceived comfortable route, then those trips are happening on arterial streets. I think the model in some senses is also skewed to higher classification of streets, which we would find to be more high volume because, and I'm going to flip slides real quick, so don't watch. When you get to this, composite map, you can see really quickly there are local streets that have that predominance. But if you look at a majority of some of the streets that start to, particularly in areas where you expect there's a lot of destinations in close proximity, higher classification streets are going to pop out because they're going to have more trips because there's more origins and destinations along those corridors. So they're going to have more trips, and it's kind of, we intend, right, that where that's the case in terms of identifying those origin destinations, those trips will be consolidated together and they will show up as a higher priority and higher evaluation. You see that kind of also as we start to build this tool out. I don't know if that answered your question, Carol, but okay.
I have a question. This is Lauren Freeman, Commissioner. I really like that including equity considerations in this. My one concern is kind of targeting these areas requires them to fix up their sidewalks, and these are potentially more low-income areas. So I'm curious, I know there's some provision within the Sidewalk Improvement Program that helps lower income families pay for this, and I'm curious if there's a consideration in terms of the area that you're looking at and budget-wise, how much help can be given out and whether that's kind of part of the conversation as well.
Jake?
Yeah, this is Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer. Commissioner Freeman, we've got a lot of funding set aside to help in financial assistance. and in cost share help. Essentially, our constraint is kind of the money that's set aside for the city. That's what's going to hold us to how many repairs we can do. We've got just so much money set aside that we're going to be rolling over from previous years into this year's program.
Jessica Moore, there's a couple other considerations I'd like to add to this conversation that we've had, which is as we talk about scale, we have kind of averaged out what has been completed in year 1 and year 2, and also looked at if the goal was to complete this in 10 years, like originally laid out, how much mileage per year of sidewalk basically needs to be completed per year. And that's about 39 miles of sidewalk per year in terms of inspection. The issue is, without our next kind of iteration of the model, is knowing each 39 miles within that is not probably equal in terms of number of defects or scale and severity of defects. And so hopefully a model in future years will help us be able to understand where we can kind of scale and scope that program in terms of that. In terms of city liability, also in terms of what percentage of it happens to be on terms of what the city has committed to repairing in terms of ADA ramps or other defects where we're responsible. The other consideration is commercial versus residential property owners. And so one of the things is there's kind of, when you choose a geographical area, you're kind of choosing an equal mix of those. You can kind of see as you pull out some of these layers, when you start to look at some of the classifications of streets that pop out in terms of, we'll be looking at, I think, how that falls basically versus commercial versus residential, because the program for assistance is for residential owners. And so that's a little bit different scenario that could impact also where we fall in terms of how big of a program we can select to accomplish.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Lauren, your point reminded me of another thing I wanted to bring up. And I always feel kind of guilty asking these because y'all are probably already on top of it. But seeing that there's a new director of equity and inclusion for the city, it may be worth bringing him into this discussion since we're talking about equity so much. So Jessica, you've probably already had this conversation, but I'd be curious to hear what he said about targeting, trans disadvantaged neighborhoods, because I feel like it could go two ways, right? On one hand, if they need to use sidewalks a lot, it's really great to focus on these sidewalks to get a really cohesive network so people can do what they got to do. On the other hand, there's always those concerns that, and it's hard to say how much of this is anecdotal and how much is actually supported by data, but when you improve infrastructure in a neighborhood, does that lead to increased housing costs and gentrification and all that jazz, right? So I'd be curious to see what, I don't know if you say his name, Faris or Faris Mohammed, what he would have to say about the various indices that the model has spit out here.
Nick, this is Jessica Moringer. I appreciate that comment. I think we intend to have those conversations with him. At this point, I have not had that conversation.
Okay. I think in that case, I don't know, this sounds kind of silly probably, but I'm not sure I feel comfortable really making a decision based on my personal preferences until I kind of hear from them, because since we have them available, may as well, avail ourselves of his services. And I think, my gut reaction is, well, option 3 is, clearly the model that factors in equity the most heavily. So, to me, that seems like a slam dunk. Let's do that one, right? But I don't know a lot about the research and literature here, so that's why I'm kind of going to defer to the expert. And if my gut actually makes sense. So that's just for me though.
Well, I'll make just a couple of rather big picture comments. I know we've been looking at this for several months, if not a couple of years at this stage. And I see Michael is still on. I'm hoping Michael can chime in now during the public comment here. But I think going way back, the two things that we discussed the most were destinations and making sure we had, a thorough look at the destinations that would go into a model. And from where I'm at, that's been accomplished. again, I'd like for other people to chime in. And the second thing was the environmental justice part of it. When we first started talking about this, you know, it was on the table, but to the extent that it's being addressed now, it was much different, and this is much better. So I'm really happy to see those aspects of this and their consideration in this model, in any model. And so I think this is great. I know there's been a lot of work on this, Jessica, so thank you so much. This is a good deal.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Not hearing anybody else jumping to comment. I guess the realization I had that that we haven't necessarily yet had input by the Equity Inclusion Director makes me wonder. I mean, for me, I mean, obviously you guys need a decision from us, so I do want to act on that. I don't want to keep deferring this, but on the other hand, I'm not so sure that we're the most qualified from a holistic standpoint here. I wonder if it would be possible to almost have to vote for an option based on what we currently know, but I don't know if it necessarily should be the final say, given that we're not experts in equity and inclusion. I don't know how to best go about doing this here.
Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. I mean, it might be appropriate you support the methodology and defer to staff to choose appropriate weighting based on guidance from, you know, recommended best practices from our available other staff expertise. I think that probably gives us a time ability to consult with them, make sure we have adequate, if there's something really out in the blue that we need to come back because we've like, oh, we need to totally scrap this and do something different. I think we could come back and have that conversation. You know, we could have that understanding, but otherwise that if we're in the direction that we want to keep moving forward, we would like equity to be considered. We think we want to make sure that we're not doing more damage than good in our intention of trying to prioritize this, that we could get that guidance from you tonight and continue to move forward to take it to City Commission. I think the concern from our behalf is we're delayed already in this process, and we really do need to be able to allow Jake Baldwin to have enough time as program manager of this program to be able to run this in 2021 and spend the funding that he has budgeted.
Thank you for that input. I think that kind of clears up my path for a motion I would eventually like to make. Sorry, Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Before I do that, I want to make sure everybody who wanted to speak had a chance to, but I think we're kind of closing in on a motion, at least that I'm thinking of. So anybody else?
Don't forget the public comment, Nick.
Thank you, Steve. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Is there any public comment on this agenda item? And I'm out of practice, huh? Doesn't sound like there's anybody. Okay. In that case, I'm going to make a motion that we, I guess, accept and approve the model and its outputs for prioritizing sidewalk improvements, but defer final decision on which option to select to, I guess, relevant stakeholders within city staff. And specifically, that would be both Faris Mohammed and Evan Corinta, I think, should be included as well. So is that motion in line with anybody else's thinking? I'm not sure if I'm way out on a limb here or if you guys have already decided on something else. So any feedback would be appreciated.
Donna Holtine, I agree with exactly how you stated that, and I really like the way that Jessica stated it. And so I'd like to second.
Okay. Thank you, Donna. Any discussion on that? Because it is kind of different from what we were asked to do in the agenda, I think. So now's your chance. Okay. Not hearing any. Ally, can you call roll for this vote, please?
Ally's MSO. Lauren?
Aye.
Thomas?
Aye.
Charlie? Okay. Donna?
Aye.
Steve? Steve?
Aye. Sorry, I had it muted.
Carol?
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
And Aaron?
Aye.
Alrighty.
Just to make sure I heard it correctly, did anybody abstain or dissent? My attention was elsewhere for a second.
No.
Okay, cool. Well, in that case, no. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Thank you, everybody, for kind of,
I guess, agreeing to defer this, at least in terms of our authority to staff. So I think that should go well, hopefully. And Jessica, thanks again for all your work on this, especially having to go back, maybe not to the full drawing board, but at least partly to the drawing board to add in the equity stuff. So I think it's really important that we have this information. So at least now we can make a good decision. Tom, is that a clap or a raised hand? Okay. I didn't see the action lines on it. Okay. It's the sound of one hand clapping. Okay. Well, in that case, do we need a break? We're an hour and a half in and we have 3 more things. I think that the third agenda item is going to be pretty quick because we just saw it last month. So I would propose that we forge ahead and go to agenda item number 3. Anybody, yay or nay? That's yay
I would
enough.
agree with that, Nick.
Thank you, Steve, and all the thumbs ups. Item number 3, receive final design of public outreach and education campaign messages and schedule of combined rollout plan for neighborhood traffic management program. Okay. Dustin, is this you again? I'm still loading here. Yep.
This is me again, Dustin Smith with MSO. So, as you said, we've seen the neighborhood traffic management program several times over the past few meetings, and so hopefully this will be pretty quick. So I made up the agenda item kind of providing an update of the 5 E's approach to the neighborhood traffic management program, kind of broken down by E, if you will. And Amanda Sahin is going to take over here in a minute and talk about the attached timeline for the neighborhood traffic management program and more of a kind of how things are going to be phased in time to roll out together. So I think I can turn it over to Amanda with that. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Amanda Sahin, Engineering Program Manager. I just wanted to go through a little update on some of the timing. Dustin and I have been kind of working on this together, hitting different aspects of it and tag teaming this. It's a much bigger program, I think, than anyone anticipated. It's been a lot of work, but I'm hoping we get some good results from it. So we're finally now, we've obviously had some delays with COVID and everything. So I think we're finally getting to the point where we're about ready to launch all of this. And so we wanted to just give you kind of an update of how it's all going to time out as, best we can. There might be some small modifications made, but so we had the bid for the 25 mile per hour signs. That was passed, I believe, that ordinance in, I think, October by City Commission. So we had, we bid that out, and the low bidder that's actually been awarded by Commission, who we're going through all the process now to actually get the contract document signed. They will be ready to start installing signs the first part of January. They're going to be trying to move through pretty quick through the city. So we have hired we are also in the process, I guess, we've selected a consultant and working on a scope of work with them to help us with the maps for all those signs. So we have a pretty good idea of the approximate number. It needs to be refined a little bit. And so we have a consultant that's going to be helping us with that effort. So they'll be starting to work on that here shortly in the next 2 weeks so that they can get a little bit ahead of the contractor so he can start installing in January. They'll be kind of doing neighborhood by neighborhood is how we intend for the contractor to go. So starting in January, those will start to be installed. Then we will be looking at probably, we're going to try to get right before they're installed in some locations, a little bit of before traffic data. It's a little bit hard because nothing has been normal as far as traffic since last March. So we've waited and waited and waited, and it's still not normal. So I think at a certain point, we just need to get some data. We'll see if it's able to be compared apples to apples to data we get 4 months from now. If conditions change, we might see some other shifts, but we're going to do what we can. We're going to go out and get some data in January also to try to get, after that Christmas kind of break, try to capture some of that, and we'll start getting signs installed. The education campaign is going to roll out January 25th is the plan at this point. So that is 1 week before students start back at KU. And at that point, we also intend right about that same time to start doing the enforcement efforts. We kind of have this phase 1, phase 2 enforcement. Phase 1 is really meant to be more of an educational phase of enforcement. Officers will still maintain some discretion, but the goal will be mostly education about, hey, there's a new speed limit, here's a program we're doing. We are creating, Alta's creating a handout for them, kind of an educational handout for them to hand out with their, either when they stop and make contact or if there's a written warning or anything given. So we're going to be having PD focus on that for the first kind of, in each area they go in for the first little bit. And then it'll kind of move into phase 2 of enforcement, the last kind of half. We're looking at this really being about a 60-day push for the education campaign and the increased enforcement, where they really go out, and we're going to try about 20 hours a week of enforcement during that time that's guided by data. So as we put these signs up, we're going to go to certain kind of, I guess, model streets. We're going to like pick a street that has a certain geometry and everything and see kind of what we're seeing and apply that same, I guess, assume that that's going to kind of be a model for other streets that are similar to it. And that'll help hopefully guide us in times of day and locations that we should really focus that enforcement effort. So we'll be doing that data kind of continually throughout as these signs are installed, and as we're through the 60-day push, we're going to continually have data collection efforts going on that are going to just help us guide. And we'll probably be evaluating every week where we want those officers and what hours we want them there. So that will be in really direct contact with police pretty regularly. They'll be tracking how many stops they're making, kind of what the average speed they're seeing is, and all of that. So we'll have that information. The speed limit signs, if the contractor works as quick as they think they can, will hopefully be installed by mid-February. So we've given them to basically March 1st. So that first part of the rollout, about the first month of the program, we're still going to be hitting some neighborhoods with signage. It's just really hard to time all this because you can't put up 1,000 signs overnight. We don't want to wait too long after you install them to start enforcement, but we also, so we didn't want to push the rollout too late of the education and enforcement, but you don't want to do it too soon either. So we're trying to kind of split that difference and meet in the middle with that timing so that there's some overlap on both sides of, so some neighborhoods, might get that enforcement a little later on in the program than others based on when they get the signage in that neighborhood. But we're hoping really that 2-month push, which is most of February and March, is where you're going to see the enforcement, the data collection, really, a lot of that, and that education campaign. And then we will kind of taper back a little bit. I think you're still going to see, we're kind of hoping for a goal of 10 hours a week of enforcement throughout the remainder of the year that's guided by data. So we're still going to continue that effort throughout the summer. It's just going to be at a little lesser scale. And then we're considering doing kind of another ramp up of the program if things are a little more normal next August when students come back. We're hoping that we can kind of push out the program again with some more yard signs and more media and things like that. Maybe ramp up enforcement for a short time there also as we get kind of the students coming back into the community. So we're looking at 2 pushes of the program out. For the education campaign, Dustin's going to kind of go over the designs, but we're looking at, we're doing yard signs are going to be a huge part of it. We're going to have business posters, hopefully some magnets on city vehicles, stickers to hand out, educational flyers to hand out, all kinds of things like that. And we're really going to be pushing for, I can't remember what they're calling them, but they're, I think they're campaign ambassadors, people throughout the community that want to be involved. I think we have, an idea of several of those people that would be willing to help kind of be those campaign ambassadors, helping us get this word out and distribute signs and that. We're really hoping the Multi-Modal Transportation Commission, that the members of that are willing to jump in and help with that effort too, to really push this campaign out and make it successful. It's going to look a little different than we'd originally thought, because we can't have some of the events we kind of thought when we started this thing. So we're working on that plan now with exactly what those things are going to be. We've had a stakeholder team involved through this process, which we've had a couple of transportation commissioners on, and we've got people from police department, from planning and development, from fire, all the different groups we've had involved from our field group. So it's really been a diverse team. Let me just give you a quick update on the, I'm going to pull up here on my computer just so I can read it to you guys. We have got purchase orders out for all the equipment that we were going to buy. We've started to receive that. So we purchased 4 bike and pedestrian counters. We've purchased a total of 16 speed volume counters. Half of those are pole mounted and half of them are surface mounted in the street. We've purchased 4 speed feedback signs, 4 speed trailers, which are feedback signs and variable message board signs. So they can be either or, that we think will be nice to have as we can say a message, or we can just do the radar with it. We've purchased 2 MyoVision cameras, which help with our count efforts. And then we've also purchased several traffic calming. It's probably about $70,000 of temporary traffic calming elements that we will use kind of the next effort of the program after the big push of the education campaign is picking one neighborhood to do a pilot program with some temporary speed humps, things like that. And so we've purchased some of the equipment for that effort that we'll look at doing probably next fall. So that's kind of how everything plays together and where we stand on things. And then Dustin can go through, I don't know if we want to have questions on that first, how you guys want to do that, or if you want Dustin to go ahead and go through the designs.
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. May as well break it up to questions first, just in case there are any burning questions on the commission.
I was kind of curious about the speed limit signs. Are we basically replacing the existing signs, or are we adding signs? And thirdly, if somebody wants to know where a sign is going to go, is there a layer on the GIS maps to show that?
This is Amanda Saheen. Yeah, we have, I think we're anticipating like 900 or so new signs. So most of these are on local streets, which a majority of don't currently have signage. There's a few that have 30-mile-per-hour signage already, and those will be replaced in those cases. I think we're assuming about 100 of those. There might not even be that many, but most of our local streets are not currently signed with the speed. So we will be installing new signs in most cases. We have the stuff in GIS. I don't believe the sign layer is public. I don't know if Dave or any of them, I think they're still working on some of the accuracy of some of the sign, because we have a lot of signs. And so I wouldn't say that that's necessarily public, but we are using GIS to design where they need to go. And we have a consultant that's going to be helping with that effort. So but I don't think the current sign layer, Dave, can you weigh in on that? If that's public?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I don't believe that it is. Yeah, it'll be pretty much, generally speaking, it'll be at the beginning of each block after you leave a street of a higher classification or speed limit. So if you turn off of an arterial street to a residential street, it would be there probably within 50 feet or so of the beginning of the street. So generally speaking, that's where they will be.
And then after that, Dave, were they like every 2 or 3 blocks or every 6 blocks, or maybe it's kind of hard to say.
Dave Cronin, the engineer, I believe it was a quarter mile every, after you start the street, it would be every quarter mile after that if you had a very long residential street. I don't know if there's that many that are that long without having another side street that connects to it that you would turn off from onto it that would necessitate a sign. So that's the criteria that we've used to come up with the number.
So if I'm correct, our block's about 600 by 300. I'm sure that varies a lot too. So it sounds like it's every 2 or 3 blocks generally.
And this is Amanda Saheen. You're going to find though most of our areas like East Lawrenceville, West Lawrence, you're going to likely cross a collector before you get that far again, which is another higher classification street. So in areas like that, there's likely going to be more often there'll be signage. As Dave was stating, there's not a lot of streets that are long enough without crossing another higher classification street to hit that.
Thank you.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Amanda, just out of curiosity, who is the consultant who was selected for this speed limit sign placement?
Dave, should I mention that yet? Because we're still negotiating.
Oh, okay.
This is Amanda
That's
Saheen.
fine.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't, because we don't have a contract yet kind of agreed to with them. I don't want to mention that.
No worries. Just curious. Does anybody else on the commission have any further questions?
This is Amanda Saheen. I do want to state though, Nick, since you mentioned that, we did place a priority on people with local knowledge to Lawrence because we are actually asking this consultant to help more with the program than just these maps. We're going to ask them to do a lot of the data collection efforts for us as far as the, taking city equipment and going out and putting them up, pulling it down, analyzing the data, kind of recommending to us where they see enforcement needs. So we are going to be using the consultant for a lot more than just the maps. That's just kind of their first effort. So we did prioritize kind of availability and knowledge of Lawrence.
Yeah, I do remember seeing the RFP and thinking, wow, that's a really interesting variety of services that are asked for. So yeah, it should be interesting to see how this all goes down. So if there aren't any further questions on this section, I guess, shall we turn it over to Jake Baldwin then?
Dustin Smith.
Oh, Dustin.
Sorry.
Gonna go through the final design of the campaign messages and the graphics to go along with the messages. So just reiterate that the design of these messages and the graphics had a stakeholder team that with representing various entities both inside and outside of the city staff, including a couple of commissioners from the Multi-modal Transportation Commission. And we also had public survey and public input with over 1,000 responses from the public that were the stakeholder team took into account in developing these messages and the appearance of the message as well. So this is message 1. It starts with us, we slow down for each other. And obviously this is targeting our primary goal of the neighborhood traffic management program, which is to make the neighborhood streets safer and reduce speeding on neighborhood streets. Yeah, I think message 2, please. A second look at message 1, just how it would appear as the yard sign. Again, yard signs are going to be a big focus of the getting the message out to the public. So message 2, it starts with us, we stop for each other. So this is addressing the second concern, which is yielding to pedestrians as they're crossing the street, which was noted by the stakeholder team early on as another concern in addition to the speed on local streets. And again, what it would look like as an actual yard sign in the yard. And message 3 is we look out for each other. And this is addressing the driver behavior or the inattentive driving. Just reminding people to there's other users and we pay attention. And I think that's my overview. I know, at least I assume a lot of the members of the body have been waiting to see these because it's been in development most of this year. So I guess I'll open it up to any comments.
Thank you, Dustin. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Any comments from the Commission? Lauren, have you been able to get involved in this one yet? I know we appointed you last time, I think.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Lauren Freeman, Commissioner. I was involved in the most recent discussion where we were kind of finalizing the design of the signs and had some good discussion and gave some kind of recommended revisions, and the team did make some changes, and some parts of the signs just can't be changed because you have to keep it pretty simple, the message very large. So kind of worked with those caveats, but overall, I think the whole group was happy with how they came out.
That's good to know. Thanks. Any other comments from the Commission?
I don't know if this is a question or a comment or what, but be interesting to talk to a behavioral psychologist about the effect that these signs are really going to have on how people drive and how people act. I have no idea. You know, it's going to make a big difference, a little difference. So what it really means. I know there are going to be some people that see a sign a lot and it kind of, okay, I get it. I guess I'm probably more concerned, and probably the biggest question is for those people who don't care, you know, who speed, who are, you know, irresponsible in every way imaginable. If you know, if this is going to change things a lot, anybody want to take a shot at that? Lauren, you seem to be shaking your head. Did you guys think about this and talk about it some?
Well, so Lauren Freeman, Commissioner, I was initially kind of cynical maybe of how a campaign like this could be impactful. But I think one, the consultant I know provided some literature on kind of best practices on this and how they've seen positive results. So that gave me some hope in this campaign. And then also I think it's great that we're doing kind of a mix or a combination of both this messaging campaign and the speed change and kind of enforcement side of it. I think that coupled together will hopefully be more impactful than just one or the other. But yeah, I'm also very interested to see how this all rolls out and if we can actually make some impact here.
I know there's been a lot of discussion publicly about the reduction in the number of tickets. I think, help me out here, over the last 10 years, how it's dramatically decreased in Lawrence. And it'd be interesting, you know, 3 to 5 years from now, what that looks like. I mean, we're picking up on enforcement, so, you know, maybe we could see that data increase just because there's going to be more of it. But at some point, it'd be interesting to see how this all connects. But that's an excellent point. Without enforcement, a sign isn't going to have much of an impact, in my opinion, in the long run, or even a lot of signs.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Any other additional comments or questions? And if not, I'll bring up public comment. Is anybody here intending to comment on this item? Sounds like that's a no. In that case,
raising my hand.
Michael, we need to get your webcam, you know?
Well, I did the raise your hand little icon.
Oh.
Anyway, yeah, I'd like to comment. Thank you.
All right, sounds good.
Michael Allman, Sustainability Action Network. I have a lot of hope for this program. I think having such a whole system approach like Amanda has developed here is just maybe one of the most effective ways to go about this. I mean, who knows how effective, but approaching it from many different angles and different times, I think is a great idea. And she has a lot of balls in the air in this, obviously, and I think she's got it kind of scheduled out really nicely. One thing that I was concerned with, though, oh, and by the way, yeah, hey, Amanda, I will be a campaign ambassador. Brook Creek neighborhood is 20 mile an hour neighborhood, and we're proud of it. So yeah, we want more of this. Amanda also mentioned the typical street model that would be representative of a number of different streets to monitor and then use enforcement. One thing to keep in mind, unless you already have thought of it, is that there's a difference regardless of geometrics or length or anything, whether a street tends to be kind of backwater or it tends to be a cut-through street. Focus on the cut-through streets. That's where you're going to get most of your speeding. As far as how effective, you know, we're never going to get to 100% everybody driving exactly at the speed limit. We know that. We'd like to. It's really going to be a matter of what percent change we see happening, how many people, what percentage of the drivers do slow down or do pay attention. That's going to be the metric. There's only one thing in this whole program that I'm disappointed in. I'm very disappointed in those signs. It's a good idea to have them, but the idea of the program, at least in this phase right now, is 25 miles an hour. And nowhere in any of the literature that I've seen does it even mention 25. They're too generalized and just a general concept, slowing down, or, you know, people, to some people in the community, slowing down means going from 45 to 43. You know, I mean, that's relative, and slowing down doesn't say what it needs to say. It needs to say neighbors drive 25, or we drive 25 in our neighborhood, or we drive 25 for safety. 25 needs to be stated clearly and repeatedly in all of the information. As far as I'm concerned, other communities have used that very effectively. So I think it's important that we make the goal itself notable, that goal of 25 miles an hour is really what we're talking about. Well, thanks a lot.
Yep. Thank you, Michael. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Any final comments before we move on to the next agenda item? All right, seeing as there are none, thank you everybody for your input. Thank you, Amanda and Dustin, for walking us through that, and for Lauren for representing us on the committee. And we are at 2 hours. Shall we push on or take a quick break? Anybody? Thoughts one way or the other?
I'd push on. They're pretty quick items, aren't they?
Well,
hopefully.
I don't know. Sometimes we say that and they end up being deep discussions. It's always hard to tell. I mean, we can certainly try. Let's push on, hearing no other particular strong opinions. All right, agenda item number 4, 2021 Multi-modal Transportation Commission Annual Retreat. So we need to come out with some sort of action plan for how we're gonna tackle the retreat in the age of COVID. So Dave, is there anything you wanted to start off by saying here before we just kind of
start discussing stuff?
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. Just say that, you know, we've done this annual retreat the past few years, and I think it's been a good thing, and especially a good thing to start out the year with. And that, you know, in addition to having it, we'd looking to, you know, put together an agenda with your involvement. You know, it's your retreat, and so we would like to get a subcommittee together to work with staff to help develop the agenda as we've done in past years. So yeah, it will be a little different this year, meeting virtually, but nonetheless, looking forward to having the retreat, and just would like to get your thoughts on maybe a general timeline. I think the last few years we've done February. We are having a regular meeting in January, which we can discuss, which we'll show in the next agenda item for meeting calendar. So we are having a meeting in January, just a study session. But anyway, yeah, just looking for some volunteers if you do agree that this retreat would be beneficial next year. So.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Thanks for starting us out, Dave. From my point of view, I would really like if on this committee we had at least one person who's been on here for a while and somebody who was brand new. So I don't know how many you were hoping for, 3 perhaps. I don't know if that's the magic number here, but I think it would help to kind of get both sides of that view, because we do have kind of a, I don't know, I guess almost a split commission here, in that there are people who have quite a few years of experience here and others who have a couple months. So that being said, is anybody already chomping at the bit to volunteer for this thing? It's
I feel like this can be a good opportunity if you have a whole bunch of things that you're interested in that you feel maybe don't get discussed as often as you'd like, or if you have some sort of grand vision that is kind of hard to articulate, this is the committee to be on for that. So things that get discussed at the retreat tend to dominate our discussions for the rest of the year, or at least influence them. So I would say it can be helpful to have an influence on what gets discussed at the retreat. So Dave, is 3 how many we usually have on this kind of committee in the past?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I think we've had 3, 2 or 3. We need at least 2, no more than 3. So if there's 3 folks that would like to help, that would be great. But I think 2, minimum 2.
Okay. Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Is there usually any, I don't know, conflict of interest for the current chair to also be, well, because it won't be current at that time, but for the current or recently past chair to also be on that committee, or is it usually better practice to have people who are not chair or vice chair, current or immediate past? Any thoughts on that, I guess, Steve?
Well, I would volunteer. I want to make sure that, you know, Carol, Donna, Aaron are not chomping at the bit, but I'd be happy to do it.
Does anybody know if Charlie would really want to be on this committee? I know it's difficult to make decisions with him not here, but I don't know.
Donna Holteen, committee member. I think Charlie was on it last year, which it doesn't
I think
matter.
it was him and John.
And me.
Okay.
I think I'm going off, so I won't be at this. But I will say and I can't think of her name, but the woman who did our facilitation at the last, at our last.
Jenny O'Brien.
She was great. She came to the planning meeting. She was really good about helping us flesh out the ideas that we kind of were batting around. And so I think this committee will get really good support from city staff.
Donna, did you say you're going off as in you are not going to pursue a second term?
Right.
Okay, just making sure I understood that correctly. Okay, well, in that case, I guess it wouldn't make a lot of sense for you to be on this committee, but at least now we know. Okay, sounds good. So Steve has signed himself up at this point, at least tentatively. So Lauren or Tom, you probably knew I was going to pick on one of you, but I think it would be helpful for at least one of you to be on this committee. And I think we've already volunteered each of you to be on a committee already. So depending on how intense the commitments are, I guess, judge against that, right? So at least this one only goes till mid-January, I guess, late January. So just keep that in mind, I guess, as we discuss here. Let's see. I guess apart from choosing the people who are going to help plan this thing, we're also going to try to figure out kind of how we're going to do it. So does anybody, even if they're not going to be on the committee, have any kind of strong opinions on how we're going to make this happen? I'm kind of thinking that we're going to have to make liberal use of Zoom's breakout room feature. I was in a conference fairly recently where that was surprisingly effective. If we had had more time to actually discuss in our breakout rooms, it would have been much more effective, but that's always the issue in interactive conferences, right? So I guess as long as that's a possibility, I think it will be, we'll at least be able to replicate a couple of the features that do happen at the in-person meetings. So,
Nick, I've actually given it a little bit of thought, mostly just tonight, and I would probably save it for the committee. I think I can't imagine being on a Zoom call for 8 hours doing something like this. Maybe 2, 3, 4 hours, and I think we really need to focus on 2 or 3 big issues and have people come prepared and pretty much just go around the table. And I think having somebody like Jenny facilitate would be a good idea. I'm not sure it's a requirement given the format. So with that, I think that, certainly if anybody wants to chime in tonight, but I think we could probably figure this out with the committee and share that with the group in January, in our January meeting.
I agree. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. And I guess, Steve, I don't know if this was tacit or not in what you're saying about switching from 8 to 4 hours. Do you mean to say that the entire retreat should only be 4 hours, or that it should be broken up into 4-hour segments? I don't know. I mean, that's an additional time commitment, but on the plus side, I don't know. Sometimes it's easier for me to take a half day off work versus a full day off of work.
Well,
so,
let's do this. Let's do this. Let's not try to, let's try to do it from the bottom up.
Sure.
Let's see what our topics are and see what we need to cover those topics. My inclination is to have a half day total and call it a day. But it's going to take some preparation and some input from everybody to be able to do that in a meaningful way.
True.
These are just my thoughts for now. I mean, the committee might say, oh, gee, let's go for 2 days, so let's keep it.
I had a quick question for you. Since you were on this committee last year, what would you say is the kind of general time and duration commitment for planning a retreat? 3 meetings, 4 meetings?
This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. We've typically done about 3, I think.
In the past couple years.
Okay.
So probably 3 for an hour. An hour.
I'm remembering one meeting. I mean, I felt like the meeting was really efficient and we had a really great list of topics. So, I mean, I think you guys met more to talk about where, but I think for commission members, or at least, and I don't think I skipped any, it just seemed like a really easy, natural thing to do.
That's a great endorsement.
We had 2 last year, so it's
Not a big time commitment, but
I have a question. Lauren Freeman, Commissioner. Do we develop any sort of like work plan at this retreat?
I would say so. The Kuzmyak MMTC chair. I think that's usually the goal, at least. I don't know if I necessarily pulled it off as the 2020 chair. I think the plan was to develop kind of a couple different horizons of projects and topics that we wanted to tackle, and then somehow work that into the agenda. And I think with Dave's help, we did get reasonably close in plotting out what we want to talk to immediately, what we want to eventually do by the end of the year, and stuff maybe in the 3 to 5 year time horizon in terms of topics that we think need to get more focus. And I think that's what Dave has helped me do each of these agenda planning meetings before the main meeting. Kind of trying to take from that laundry list of items and plug that into various study session and agenda item slots. Is it perfect? No. There's definitely stuff that I think has been brought up that we still haven't talked about. And honestly, there's so many topics that it's probably just forgetfulness on my part. There's a lot of stuff that we always want to be discussing. And I think it's really just our best effort to tackle what truly is a large topic, multimodal transportation, right? So I guess the short answer is yes, the retreat is definitely where we try to plan our upcoming workload. And with the realization that that has to fit with the other stuff that we do need to kind of approve on a more normal basis. So,
well, actually, Nick, I would add that one of the topics that we need to talk about is follow-up. And I'm glad Lauren asked that question. And that's why I think that we need to keep it, we need to keep it simple and big picture and prioritize what we think is most important and actually come up with actionable things we can follow up on. I think it's really important that whatever we do, we follow up on it and be consistent with that. And last year, I think we had a list of 10 things. That's too many for a group that meets once a month for, 2 to 4 hours. So I think we need to keep the scale of this in mind.
Lauren Freeman, Commissioner, I'll just add that I'd be willing to volunteer and help with this.
Okay. Thank you for volunteering then. Thank you, Kuzmyak MMTC chair. So that's I guess that's 2 strongly tentative people to volunteer at this point. So is there any, I guess, third before we kind of move on, or, I mean, I'm willing to go with 2 for right now, but. Okay, seeing none, in that case, if there's no objections, I may just volunteer myself just to kind of help out. I feel like at this point I do enough agenda planning. This would just be kind of an expansion of that task. So anyway, as long as there's no conflict for the soon to be passed chair helping to plan the retreat, I will volunteer as well.
Well, Nick, I'm going to be so bold here as to start the planning now. And I think that if each of us would think about 3 things, and maybe there's categories here, but let's not even try to make it difficult. Just, it could be, I want to paint every crossing in Lawrence green, it could be something like that, or it could be something procedural and process oriented.
So but 3 goals, basically?
With 3 goals, 3 things that are on your mind, and send those 3 things to Dave. And that would be streamlining the first meeting so we'd have something in front of us to evaluate. Because that's exactly what I was going to suggest in our first meeting. Let's ask everybody what they're thinking,
Yeah,
and
but it'd be a lot easier to prepare ahead of time for sure.
So if we could do that and, ask for that to be returned in the next week, a week from today would be the 14th, to Dave, then we could, go ahead and schedule our Zoom meeting next week sometime and knock this thing out. How does that sound?
Kuzmyak, I'm MTC chair. I think that sounds fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you for being bold. In that case, yeah, let's do that by December 14th. We'll send stuff to Dave, and then Dave, if you could find some way to schedule us for a meeting, or 5, I don't know who else is going to be involved from your side, but if you can maybe set down a doodle poll or something like that, that would be helpful.
Or I don't know, is that something that the people on the committee
normally do? I'm not sure whose responsibility this is.
Dave Cronitz, the engineer. We can, staff can help facilitate the meeting time, and I will check on Jenny's availability to help facilitate the meeting, because I agree she did a great job last year, and so if she's available to help, especially here early on, just have to see her availability, but we can try to set up a meeting here in the next week or two to kick things off. So,
too, I'd like to add that we may come up with some things in our January your turn meeting. People that are going to be participating in that. So I would say let's get input internally first, but let's not conclude all of the topics until after we've had that session.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. And that's why I was really hoping to get that done before the retreat, because I think there'll be some really interesting inputs to go over.
Right.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. So I also really liked how Jenny facilitated the meeting last year, but I also liked how Scott McCullough also facilitated the year before. It seems like we usually get people from different departments. I don't think Jenny is an MSO, right? So I guess, would it be worth it to see if anybody else has the availability as well, or if anybody's really interested in working with a bunch of transportation, fans. So I mean, I'm thinking something like somebody like Evan Carenta, or maybe Jeff Crick if he's got the time, Amy Miller, Derek Rogers. I don't know, somebody who kind of is tangentially related to transportation but doesn't necessarily live it. Adam Weigel, though, he definitely lives it. So I don't know. I feel like there's a couple of options out there who also may have availability, who could provide an interesting perspective and still good facilitation. Though, I mean, I'm totally fine with going with Jenny O'Brien as first choice also.
Dave Cronitz, the engineer. I'd recommend we
check on availability of different staff, and maybe we can discuss that in our first meeting. In the past, we've also had more than one staff, other staff from other departments attend certain pieces of the meeting. So there's that possibility too. And yeah, it just depends on availability. And Jenny's in our department, so she's our education and credentialing person. So we could check with her, and then other staff too. So if there's any other ideas, don't need to know tonight, but we can send them my way, and we can kind of see who's available and how it fits the agenda.
Sounds good.
So I think, yeah, if we could the action tonight would just be to establish the subcommittee, and if you could, I guess, make a motion on the members of that subcommittee, then we can get to work.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Sounds good. No time like the present. I would make a motion that, or rather, I motion
that we form a retreat planning committee for the February 2021 MMTC retreat, consisting of myself, Commissioner Evans, and Commissioner Freeman. I think that's it.
I would second that.
Okay. Allie, can you please call roll for the vote?
Yes. Lauren?
Aye.
Thomas?
Aye.
Charlie, I think he's still out. Donna?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
Nick,
Aye.
and Aaron.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair.
Okay, let's move on to our final agenda item. Unless anybody would request a break, I'll just keep pushing forward. So, number 5 is the 2021 meeting calendar. So our action is to approve said calendar. Since the calendar has some interesting items on it, I'd like to point out a couple of those. The first one is the Your Turn Forum, which was meant to be tonight, but due to having a lot of other important regular agenda items, we decided to push it back to January and extend the length of the study session. Have not necessarily decided how long yet, but I think that was a suggestion by Steve early on that we do have a lot of stakeholder groups that are important to what we do here at the MMTC, and it'd be kind of a shame to give them just 60 minutes for maybe 4 or 5 groups. So we're thinking that 90, 120 minutes just to get a healthy enough discussion, and it'll basically just be another one of those kind of unusual meetings like we had with the Planning Commission a few months back. So does anybody have any, I don't know, I think at this point, I'll just propose that we go with a full 2-hour meeting, possibly with a short break in between just to kind of clear our heads. But at this point, the groups we've been talking to, I believe, and Steve, you can probably help me remind me here. So I know we've talked to Live Well Lawrence, who deals with public health and healthy living and all that. I've talked to the Chamber of Commerce, who's definitely interested in joining. You know what? Have we gotten a KU representative done? I know you are basically our KU representative, but would it be worth it to try to get somebody from, say, Student Senate or somebody else? I don't know. And then, yeah.
Yeah, I actually, students are so hard to get a hold of, and they're, it's just kind of a revolving door of leadership. But there are, planning type folks and people who know what the big picture for KU is that might be interested.
Okay. Do you think it'd be worth trying to snag one of those? I'm assuming administrators to see if they would be interested in joining this.
Yeah, I do. I think the director of facilities planning and development, Mark Reisky, would be interesting, or interested and interesting. He's got the big picture of what's of KU going forward with any future central district plans and just sort of the vision for the university.
Okay, I think that would be helpful. If you wouldn't mind, could you maybe send him an email and then CC me, and we can kind of take it from there? So I know this is kind of getting down in the weeds for a scheduled discussion, but while we're here, who else? Steve, am I leaving anybody out? I think there was a plan to talk to Heather Tice, who represents Cottonwood as well. And I'm not thinking of anybody else who we plan to get to speak with us.
Talked about, actually, we talked about 2 people, Marilyn Hole, and Marilyn has been active in all kinds of transportation, pedestrian issues. She's on the Park and Rec Board, and she said that she would be happy to talk to us. And I don't know if Michael Allman is still with us, but poor Michael gets 3 minutes if he's lucky. And I thought that it would be good to give Michael a little bit of time too, given his concern and how active he is in what we do and what the community does. So those are 2 people that I would recommend. And Nick, it's your call with Dave, but those are 2 that I think would be really good. And I think someone mentioned that Joey Hensler at LiveWell thought this would be something he would do, and I think that would be excellent to get Joey to come in.
I agree. Thank you, Steve. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I don't know a lot about what Marilyn Hull is involved in, but I wonder if there's any overlap between what she and Michael Allman do. This topic kind of came up when I was talking with the folks at the chamber, in that there are multiple aspects that are kind of related to economic development, and that could be freight or business, employee and customer parking, or delivery services with small vans, and no one person knows all that stuff. So the chamber is strongly considering sending a small team of 2 or 3 folks to kind of have, you know, bit of a Cerberus of economic development, as it were. So I almost wonder if it would be worth it to do something similar for kind of the public health and recreational aspect of biking and walking and jogging, kind of, you know, for fun and exercise as a health thing, which I know is only one small part of what Michael Allman and Marilyn Hull deal with, but they are fairly knowledgeable about those aspects, I believe.
Well, I did talk to Marilyn about, you know, Marilyn has been involved in boards over the years, and I think she can get into specific issues, but we also had a conversation about our process and how we interact or don't interact with other advisory boards. And I asked her to give that some thought, and I think that's something that we need to talk about. In fact, we have, and I don't think we've completed that conversation. Yeah. So when I look at Marilyn, and Michael probably too, there would be some overlap there. I think, I don't think Michael's feelings would be hurt, but I think Marilyn would bring a lot to the discussion.
Okay, let's keep them all in the conversation, I guess, and kind of see where things shake out. Because I guess it'll kind of depend on what they think their jurisdiction is as well.
Carol Bowen, Commissioner.
Yep.
What about LAN? Are we going to have any representation there?
I was just going to bring them up, actually. Thank you for segueing. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I have not yet actually officially asked anybody from LAN to join us. I'm not entirely sure who that's going to be yet, so it may take a talk with a few people to kind of see who might make most sense. So I don't know yet, but I mean, it could be Tressa Hill, Melinda Henderson, I don't know yet. So, but that is on my to-do list for sure. So I think that in general, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I think that generally covers who and what we're hoping to get from this Your Turn forum. And just to remind everybody, and really to remind myself as well, the whole point of this is to, instead of just talking amongst ourselves at a retreat and figuring out what we want to discuss, we're in a very different space because we talk about this stuff all the time, right? So it would be great to hear about people and, you know, who are tangentially involved in transportation and what their thoughts with the general transportation landscape in Lawrence and the MMTC itself. You know, what do they expect of us? Where do they think we've excelled? Where do they think we are deficient? And, you know, opportunities for improvement in the future. So it's almost like extended customer service session. I don't know if that's really the right way to put it, but just kind of a way to try to hear from people who we believe represent a good portion of the, you know, community who could be affected by our decisions. So anyway, that is January. The other really important part of January is that we're going to be electing a chair and a vice chair. So I guess be thinking if that's something that you're interested in. If you want to learn more about what it's been like to be a chair, feel free to ask me or Steve. I guess we've been chairs during 2 very different years, but I think the general responsibilities are still roughly the same. So Carol's the current vice chair, so if you're interested in what that job is like, then send her a message. So anyway, just be thinking about that. And I would say you don't have to be extremely experienced to be a chair. I'm not. I mean, this is my 2nd full year on the commission, so as long as you're willing to take on the challenge of running a meeting, which does get easier after a while, then this could be you up here, right? Anyway, that is it for January. I guess in terms of other stuff throughout the year, February is the only thing that we really have planned so far, and it's just items that kind of have been on the burner for a while and are at a point where we need to review them. Dave, is there anything in particular that you wanted to discuss about the calendar beyond January and February?
Dave Cronin, City Engineer. I would just note, for the calendar next year, that in July and September, we've scheduled the meeting for the first Wednesday of the month instead of the first Monday, due to the first Monday being a holiday, and the second Monday, the city commission room here is booked. So I know I reached out to everyone to see if there would be any conflicts with that. Didn't hear that there were, so that's the way that we've laid it out. So it's really similar to what we've done here in the past year, that we would meet the first Monday of each month with a study session at 5 and a regular meeting at 6. And then meet on the first Wednesday in July and September. So of course, if we need to extend times, or we can make adjustments during the year, but in general, we did want to set the calendar for the year, reserve the room, and so I guess for this item would seek your approval of the time and days for meeting next year.
Okay. Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Thanks, Dave. In that case, I guess if there isn't any further discussion, I would entertain a motion to approve the calendar.
I move we approve the calendar for 2021.
I will second that.
All right, the Kuzmyak MMTC Chair, thank you. Alec,
Can you please call roll for votes?
Yes. Allie Weems, MSO. Lauren.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Donna.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
Carol.
Aye.
Nick.
Aye.
And Aaron.
Aye.
All right. Thank you.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Okay, that is it for our regular agenda items. Dave, do you have any staff items for us?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I do not have any staff items.
Okay. The Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. We're on to commission items. As always, there's that PTAC update. Commissioner Kuzmyak. It's not really officially the PTAC representative anymore, but I can give you an update. All we're doing at this point is the KU School of,
I want to say urban design is, there's a class that is still in the process of doing a route redesign study. So they are doing as much public engagement as they can to try to figure out if, or, if there's a need to redesign our transit routes, and if so, what that might look like. So that's going to eventually feed into a more national level consultant-led study, starting pretty soon, honestly, probably next month. So that is underway. Does anybody else have any commission items? Carol.
I've got
You're
my
muted first.
notes. This book I've been reading, I suppose you can't, can you see it forward? Or?
I can, it's very bright.
Okay. It's not easy to read, but it is kind of interesting. Basically, this writer puts together how a driver thinks and why they're thinking the way they do. Let me see. He spends a whole chapter, and the title of the chapter is "Why Does the Other Lane Always Seem Faster?" And it's an extremely competitive view of what drivers are. Very competitive. We're always out to win. And then he went into self-driving vehicles and comparing them to real drivers and why there are issues. And he said, consider 4 self-driving vehicles at a 4-way stop. Who's going to go first? Well, they can't decide, so they either all go or none of them go. And that's because the human mind has the ability to arbitrate these things, somewhat randomly, unfortunately. Let's see, driving tends to be routine. Anything unexpected does not register. The reaction time is slower. And then he talks about the gorilla effect. If you ask spectators at a basketball game to keep track of the number of passes, they will do that. In the second quarter, if you ask them to keep track of what kind of passes, they will do that. And when they did this experiment, they had a guy in a gorilla suit running back and forth in the court, and the spectators didn't even notice. And there's so many different things going on at the same time. It's incredible that he pulled it all together. What he was pointing out is we don't have the attention span we think we do. And we can only handle a couple of pieces of information at a time. And so we prioritize. If we don't think it's important, like, I don't know, picnic sign somewhere, that's not important. It's if they look at the stop sign, if they look at a speed limit sign, that might be it. That might be the only capacity they have, and they may not remember it. And I collect quotes. I love it when they put quotes in a book. Here's one. Any man who can drive safely while kissing a pretty girl is simply not giving the kiss attention it deserves. That was by Albert Einstein. And the next one is, when people are waiting, they are bad judges of time. And every half minute seems like 5. As Jane Austen.
Some things never change.
I know. Let me see, what else have I got? I'm in my 3rd chapter now. And pretty much what I'm seeing is we have a totally disciplined population with lots of power. And I don't mean political power. I mean tons of power. We give this heavy equipment to people and they have a rudimentary understanding of what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to negotiate the rest. And I heard it tonight. Well, the drivers wouldn't do this, but they would do that. And we don't tame our drivers at all. We don't expect anything of them. And I think that's a missing piece. We need to expect more of our drivers.
Well, Carol, I'll be really curious to see what the conclusions are once they get to the part of the book about what other countries do. Because having driven in Germany pretty extensively, those drivers are tamed. They are very good at following directions. They can handle 9-foot lanes on a highway with very little issue. They know exactly when to part like the Red Sea when an ambulance comes through. They're amazing. So. Well,
this writer really doesn't have a whole lot of conclusions. He talks about the complications of being a driver. He does have conclusions on cell phones though, and he points out it's high near impossible to concentrate on a phone and driving at the same time.
Having been in a defensive driving school where they actually had us run a slalom course, a fairly complicated autocross course, while trying to send a text message. You either had a garbage text message and a good slalom time, or you hit all the cones, but you send out the text message. It's pretty impossible. So yeah, I can concur. Well, thank you, Carol. Anybody else have any items before we adjourn?
Well, I would like to, is this Donna's last meeting? It is. Well, I think we should thank Donna and hope that you get control over your 25,000 children. And, and when 20,000 e-scooters show up in the fall, we'll come looking for you. So thank you so much for everything you've done, and good luck up there.
Thank you. This has been a really good year for parking, not money-wise, but there's plenty of places to park on campus.
Good to used to it, right?
Yeah.
Well,
thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you for your service, and we hope we can find a good replacement for you.
Thanks.
Okay, well, if that's it, technically we're moving on to calendar, but since we've technically done that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I will motion that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Allie, can you please call a final roll, please?
Allie Weems, MSO. Lauren.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Donna.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
Carol.
Aye.
Nick,
Aye.
and Aaron.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Donna, it's been fun. And for everybody else, I will see you in 2021. Have a good evening.
Bye, everyone.